Good morning. The Committee of the Whole is back to order. We have one new participant in the panel, and that's Ms. Mendiola. And we'll have her please rise while we have you sworn in.
Penalty of perjury, do you affirm that any and all information that you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Okay, Mr. Chair, she's under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant Arms. My colleagues, a reminder, we will have 2 more rounds of questions for the panel. Each senator is allotted 5 minutes for questions or comments, and that doesn't include the response from the panel. Time to speak may not be yielded for more than one member to another. A member who yields the member's time on a question yields all that member's time on that question and may not later speak, even if all the time yielded was not used. That's in response to section 1.02D3 of our rules. Then after the completion of the 2 rounds, panelists will be excused until called upon for the next bill correction so that we can discuss any amendments to this bill. Amendments needs to be submitted to the in writing to the clerk via email 36glsession@gmail.com. Amendments not in writing will be called out of order. So I ask my colleagues to please get the amendments in. Then after that, then we will move to hear a motion on the bill and then rise from the Committee of the Whole, at which time I will report out the bill as recommended by the Committee of the Whole. That being said, we will begin our questions with Senator Whelan. And another fair warning is that the GITA folks will only be here this morning. They won't be available this afternoon, so please try to focus your questions on the GITA folks as much as possible. There is some information that the speaker did ask be provided. It's being copied at this point, and then as soon as it's available, it'll be provided to you all. Thank you. For everyone. Yes. Senator Moylan, you are next, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question for Gita, Ms. Mendiola. You gave a really good informative presentation at the public hearing for this bill, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to expand on one of the suggestions that you gave in reference to, I guess, kind of phasing the construction of these, what we're trying to accomplish in this bill into phases. And if you can kindly expand on that, and what is the reason that you're recommending that at the public hearing, please.
Certainly. I think what's germane to the bill is the upfront financing, whereas when we're talking about phasing, we're talking about a phased construction approach. So to differentiate the two, a phased construction approach is what the task force is currently recommending on the basis of a number of items, primarily because a phased approach would allow for quick mobilization to get ground broken. As we all know, public health is, I think I heard it yesterday, virtually homeless. They can't get an emergency GURA voucher, as we all know. And so it's more urgent for, there's immediate need. Further, the Guam Memorial Hospital, the Army Corps of Engineers report cited a shorter life of the property that we can't ignore. So a phased approach towards construction helps us mobilize quicker. Phase 1, public health. Phase 2, GMH, because we know that GMH will probably be the most involved of the phases. Just the architecture and design alone will probably be several months process, and then vetting with all the different parties that be and stakeholders, et cetera. Now, when it comes to the financing, there's different approaches you can take. Again, you can take, so I'll give you an example. GWA did a phased approach when it came to capital improvements. And that was because they were court-ordered to expend $1 million? $1 billion? About $1 billion? They were court-ordered to spend about $1 billion on upgrades to their infrastructure. Now, GWA did not want to take all that out up front because they didn't want to make the payments and the interest, et cetera, all up front when the work was going to be done over the course of 10 or so years. And so the legislative authorization was sought up front, and then when the construction schedule was, the stars aligned with the construction schedule, that was when the money was drawn down on, and that was when the debt was issued, per se, okay? Because of this quick turnaround, I would say it's virtually quick. If we're looking at breaking ground for public health within the next 12 to 24 months, and the reason for that is because public health is largely financed at this moment. There is about $30 million authorized for the CDC lab. There's $2 million authorized, or very close to being authorized, for the environmental health office. And so, because of the turnaround on that, and then because of the urgency for GMH to be built, you're kind of in the need, you kind of need to authorize the lion's share of it anyway, up front. And so you can save, if you do a phased approach, you are subject to a little bit of interest rate risk. So right now we have historically low interest rates. Having said that, to kind of present it to you in a balanced way, the interest rates were low 2 years ago, and today they're even lower. But today we're also in a pandemic environment, and that's part of the reason why the Fed is keeping them low. So as the US economy starts to rebound, what you're going to find is the ongoing economic development that goes on all over the United States may cause our interest rate to creep upward. So if you wait and you say $300 million today, $300 million later, et cetera, you have a little bit of interest risk that the body here would be taking on because you're making the decision to wait, right? But it could go the other way. So there's two ways that could go. There is some there are fees associated every time you go out for an issuance. So if you go out for an issuance today, you pay legal fees, you pay an underwriter. In this case, one of the serious recommendations of the Finance Committee was for a financial advisor. So for every issuance, you're paying fees, some of which are fees that you would save on if it was one issuance versus 2 or 3. So there is some savings involved with going out immediately. I think that the other thing is I believe there is a prescribed timeline in the bill, but it's not a prescribed timeline that says we need to go out for financing in the next 3 months. So if there is a delay with something such as the land, title, et cetera, then we don't have to issue next month. We could issue next year at some point in time. So a phased approach when it comes to construction, I believe the task force will reiterate these feelings, is a phased approach towards construction is wise and prudent. A phased approach to finance is really up to the body to decide what is affordable today, how much risk you want to take today, and what is affordable cash flow-wise today, what risk you want to take today with regard to things like interest rates, any sorts of fees that you may save on or not save on by waiting or not waiting, and factors along those lines. So I hope that answers or clearly articulates what I had possibly expounded on during the hearing.
Thank you. You also mentioned, with that phased approach, an approximate amount with the 10% escalation price, and you came out with a figure. Can you expand upon that, please, too?
Do you have the PowerPoint? Can you pull it up? Yes, it's in the, I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I do believe at the hearing I was talking off the top of my head. I said, the Army Corps of Engineers was this much, public health was this much, Guam behavioral health was this much, add 10% to that whole thing, and that's how much you need.
And I understand we're getting that sheet, so I'll wait on that question. But thank you, Ms. Mendiola. Next question I have for actually our OFB here, Steve. It was mentioned about the EITC credit being used as payment for this too. Can you expand upon that and also give us an overview of the report that you provided on this bill, please?
Good morning, Senator. Thank you. Yeah, we were, as you all know, the EITC, the child tax credit, and the ACTC we have been notified that those funds that we normally have, with the exception of the ATTC, will now be 100% reimbursed to the government of Guam. So now that becomes basically a potential funding source for the government of Guam to utilize in its operation. As far as the EITC, I believe since 2017, 18 and 19, the average collection reported by revenue tax is around $50 million. So that money potentially can be available, I believe, starting this fiscal year, which is when the reimbursement is to take place going forward. That money can be used and could be available again for government operations. So I believe the bill also identifies the EITC as the potential funding source for this project.
You're mentioning 50 million, right?
The information we received from Revenue and Tax when we asked them, can you give us at least an average of what the EITC has been for the last 3 years, we got an amount of $50 million.
Okay. That will be the safer amount rather than assuming 60, for example.
Again, the $60 million is a number that has been used in conversation and talks. All I did was basically ask Revenue Tax, can you define through historical data, actual collections, and how much you've actually paid out in income tax? And they've indicated that it's about $50 million.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. But Senator Moylan, you now have the sheet. Is there something you wanted to ask Gita, Ms. Mendiola, now that you have the data? You still got time.
Yeah. I'm sure my other colleagues will be able to, they had a chance to look it over quicker than I have, so I'm sure the questions are going to be asked. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
I'll go on.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Duenas, do you have any questions at this time?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your guidance. I think I will stick with the financing, because as I look at the bill, really the two things I think we're fundamentally talking about today is the financing mechanism and financing amounts. I think that yesterday we established a demonstration of need by discussing it with all of the entities. So going back to that, I think my question, Melanie, is then, since you've basically laid it out, should we then go into this bill and instead of looking at the 35 million, take it up to represent the true debt service of the total package? Or is there an anticipation, the reason why the 35 million was here, that federal grants and other funding sources may be the equalizer to what we are going to end up requiring for debt service?
Thank you, Senator Duenas. That's a great question. Generally, Gita says, never says no to more money. Having said that, as you're doing your cash flow analysis, I think it's a safe bet, I think this analysis does not take into account, I think Tina articulated yesterday that there are a number of grant opportunities that we can go after, that the governor has charged us with aggressively going after in the next couple of years. And we also, Tina, we have, our summer hires. We've also tasked them with doing some research about regional healthcare grants that were obtained historically in the last 2 years, in fact. And I think one of the numbers that came up was several $1 million in Micronesia, in the FSM, for various healthcare-related types of grants, not programmatic, but fixes and things along those lines. I think that there is something to be said about having skin in the game. Financiers like to see it, as well as grantors. So if you have more than enough, sometimes what may happen is a grantor is less prone to award because they'll say, you have enough, you don't need, you're not in desperate need. So by creating that, there's something to, this is a very strong base, this is a strong place to, for the finance team to start. And I think from here, we will do our very best to ensure that we uncover every stone to make sure that the people of Guam get the best deal they can with regard to the financing.
So moving now then, Melanie, to the financing scheme. In Gita's view and review of this bill, does the envisioned leaseback and the establishment of the structure of the financing scheme fit the model for Gita to basically, as you said, and I wanted to get a clarification from Senator Moylan's point as well. If you go to a one-time offering and you get a general number that's workable, you're going to pay almost like a construction loan. You're only going to pay on what you draw down on, but you lock in that rate. Correct?
You're going to pay based on what you've borrowed.
Right.
But you're only allowed to utilize the funding for what you said you're going to utilize the funding for.
Correct, correct.
Right.
Correct.
So,
and then the funding scheme here, are all the tools in the toolbox that you need, and is this the funding scheme that Gita prefers to go out on at this time?
I think one of the items we discussed was a term, the 40 years. We wanted to, if you were to go after a USDA loan, which is for a portion of the financing, which is different than a lease back. That's a direct loan for a portion of it. USDA can go out as long as 40 years. And so if there were parameters put on this bill with regard to term, I would put 40 years versus 30 or 25. What's typical in a lease back is 25 or 30.
So proposed amendment.
That's correct. I mean, this bill encapsulates financing that's broad enough and to accomplish a lease back or a traditional lending type of instrument as well.
So the reason, Mr. Chair, that I want to go down this road is normally you have a lot of A&E and all this stuff is done, things are put together, and then you say, okay, here's my price tag. Come to the legislature, look for the financing, funding, however that is going to go out. But I'm starting to see the wisdom in this approach is simply because you know the demonstrated need has been established, and you know also that you can lock in current rates, and basically it's like the government of Guam going out for a huge construction loan, essentially where you can lock down a rate, and then as the development of the A&E, as we continue to wrestle with the funding source, but we establish a baseline funding source, and then work from there. I like what you're saying, Melanie, because it sounds like if we commit to this, we still keep some reserve for appropriation on the funding coming in, but it also gives you that leverage to go out and demonstrate with federal matching and others to find other funding sources. But like you said, skin in the game, the government of Guam's committed to $35 million.
It's always nice, from our side of the table, from the Gita, from the public finance side of the table, it is nice to go, and I think that some of us here who have experience going after federal grants, it's scary to borrow after you've secured, let's say a grant, let's say you get a significant grant, and then you say, we'll give you this $20 million grant, but in order to get the $20 million, you have to go out and borrow $80 million. It is scarier to commit and sign on the dotted line and say, we will take that $20 million and cross our fingers that the legislature says yes to the 80. So this is a nice approach, we believe. But the approach, ultimately, the decision is yours, when you feel the timing is best.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got one more question, but I'll wait for my last round.
Thank you, sir. Senator Torres, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was actually asked by Senator Moylan, so thank you for bringing that up. But I did have one other thought. Being that this is a 30-year payment, a 30-year term, in the planning process, is part of the consideration the usefulness of the hospital in terms of not only meeting the medical needs of our community, but also possibly meeting the potential for residency at the hospital qualification? Are those, because I understand that part of it is facilities and part of it is personnel, but can you just speak to that long-term vision of how this 30-year financing project actually is designed for our future needs as well?
Thank you for that question, Senator Torres. One of the criteria for a hospital to be able to have residency established is that we have to have accreditation. The medical schools and universities will not allow any medical individual who is pursuing to be a doctor. We cannot get them into our facility unless we have that accreditation, and that's the criteria, and that's what we're working towards. And so that's a very good point that you're raising, that in this new hospital, that's one of the things that we'd like to establish, that facility, the accreditation, so that we can bring on board the residents, especially those who are from Guam.
Yeah. Thank you for helping me to understand that, because we're all aware that we're also trying to build and incentivize our students to go off island but come home, and residency is a critical component of their attraction to come back home right away and serve the island. So thank you for that answer. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have several questions,
Please
Mr.
feel
Chair.
free.
Thank you. So Gita yesterday had said that, we're done with studies, we need to move on and, build. And I agree with that sentiment that we are going to, hurry and build a new hospital, and that we have to house public health, expand behavioral health. So I have no objections to that. I'm just, my questions here today are regarding this financing bill that's before us, and whether this is really the best way to go forward, and do we have the answers that we need in order to go forward today? So the bill itself requires other studies to be done, and the legislature is, I guess, intending to pass this bill without the benefit of any of those studies, including feasibility study of, and a program study of all healthcare agencies. I think this is a study I'm particularly interested, because I had asked at the public hearing, if public health could provide us, before we get here to the floor, with information as to the services that needed to be near the Guam Memorial Hospital. And so they have, verbally said a few of those, or why it would be more ideal. But we are going to be encumbering, for the people of Guam, huge amounts of infrastructure costs, and I think huge costs to consolidate these agencies, and we haven't seen any study that shows cost savings because of consolidation or anything like that. So if it's, and we've seen that, anyway, so that type of thing is why I was hoping to see that. Apparently, there's a program study of all healthcare agencies being made. I think there's still work being done as to what exactly does each entity want or need in their facility. That's still preliminary stages. And I don't think that there are any consultants who are advising the government of Guam as to, what is the ideal way to build a hospital at this point, or the ideal way to consolidate public health and a hospital. And I had raised at the public hearing public health has been on a mission for decades to expand into the community and to bring public health into our community as opposed to just centralizing it. And I think they have done a great job at that over the years. And so all of that, I just wanted to have really, shown that we have that our plan for consolidation or desire to put them all together is not just, a surface level type, looks good, sounds good, but does it really perform well to meet your missions, which is supposed to be community health care? And so that type of thing, I was hoping we would get something in writing. But I think some of these studies are still being done. There's the bill calls for the RFP to be made as soon as a program study of all healthcare agencies is done. And, I don't know. I guess I'd like to see those types of things, or even what Gita's going to include in this RFP, as far as there are no parameters at all. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And there's a part of the bill that also says that they're going to enter into a contract with a construction contract. I'm talking about 83107 now, prior to undertaking the work of designing, building, financing, leasing, transferring, and maintenance, all of that. And I don't know if that's just a terminology, maybe it's too vague and it should say something else, but if we're going to enter into a construction contract prior to even a design, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me. I know we talked about terminology yesterday. There's a portion of this bill on page 12 that talks about, what the legislature is going to pledge on behalf of the people of Guam. So we're pledging rental payments. And I guess, Melanie, Director, you had said this morning that this bill also authorizes other traditional financing. Do you mean by that bonds? Because honestly, I can't see any other authority in here for any other type of financing except for the lease back. I mean, it mentions on page 12, item 4, that, other financing options are authorized. Does that section by itself mean that's our bond approval? I mean, that's the legislature's authorization to go out for a bond. And so related to this, I would like an explanation of item number 1. I tried to ask that of Mr. Byrne yesterday on the side. I can't understand that section. It says they're going to dedicate revenues from the EITC available for fiscal year 2022 only. I guess a clarification of that. And then whether this bill really does authorize any other type of financing except for this leaseback financing. And if not, I just wanted to know, what are the total costs of the leaseback financing? So we've got the documents from Gita this morning that show it's going to be 60 million annual lease payments. What will that be at the end of the 30 years? What will we have paid? And what will we have paid if we did this through bonds instead of this leaseback payment? Would, is there a difference? I mean, I know that the bond, we have it's not an unlimited, this leaseback method is kind of an unlimited amount that the government of Guam can take out or, pledge. But under the bonds, we have a cap right now that we are close to. So I just wanted to know if there's any calculations that show what the difference would have been if it was a bond versus a leaseback.
Madam Speaker, your time has elapsed, but we'll allow the panel to answer the questions, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do my best, Madam Speaker, to address all of your questions. The first is bond financing is generally cheaper than leaseback. Having said that, at this time, it does not appear that the government of Guam has the capacity to enter into the size of the transaction that you need through a bond. So yes, it can be cheaper. 50 basis points, maybe. Leasebacks tend to include a maintenance type of contract. A bond doesn't. Let me see. A loan, depending on the interest rate environment, can be cheaper or more expensive. It really just depends on the type of loan and if it's subsidized by the government or not. So a USDA loan generally is fairly low interest rates, but at the moment it's pretty on par. USDA is on par right now with your leaseback as well as your bonds. The advantage to USDA is that you can go out 40 years for a loan as opposed to 30 years or 25 years for a bond or a leaseback. From what I can see in the bill on page 12, the use of other financing options is authorized for the purposes of this act. I believe this does allow other types of financing, or does not prohibit other types of financing, page 12, section 4 that you referenced. Having said that, I would probably run this bill once more by bond counsel to ensure that it has all the relevant language that you need reflective of a typical bond bill. What's most important in a bill generally is the time frame restriction and the interest rate restriction. Earlier I had mentioned 40 years is nice because you can go out 40 years as opposed to 30. That leads to a lower payment obligation. As far as overall, your question on overall payments, how much do we pay at the end of the day? If you're appropriating $35 million and you're appropriating it for 30 years, then the answer to that is $35 million times 30 years. So $1,050,000-ish? And that's inclusive, of course, of the principal, just like a mortgage or any other loan. It's inclusive of the principal, the interest. In the case of a leaseback, generally inclusive of the maintenance, such as what you see with Teason High School or JFK, and the cost of issuance. And the cost of issuance encompasses all the things you'd see with a bond, underwriters, attorneys, GITA administrative fee, not just for the work that GITA is doing today, but for the work that GITA will be doing for the next 30 years to service these financial instruments.
Okay, so the $1 billion cost, if it's $35 million a year to finance the $767 million, but your calculation shows $60 million is what is needed for this leaseback annual lease payments, not $35 million, it's $60 million. So I calculated that to be $1.8 billion. And then I wanted to know the figures that you're using for
Madam
your
Speaker,
maintenance.
your time has lapsed. I just wanted the panel to answer your questions. Would you like to clarify anything, Ms. Mendiola, or anyone in the panel, so we can move on to the next senator?
I think to address what I believe the speaker is getting to here is I don't know if it was the intention of the writer of the bill to address an all-encompassing financing scenario wherein you paid for everybody and everything. 767 merely covers the cost that was estimated by the Army Corps of Engineers for the Guam Memorial Hospital. The additional $2 million, $1 million for public health, $1 million for the Guam Behavioral, and the additional $50 million for infrastructure, that equated to about 1.1067, as shown in slide 1 of the Healthcare Financing Committee. And you'll see less, the governor has made public her intention to use ARP financing, or ARP monies to utilize part of this cost. So I don't think it was I was not there for the writing of this bill, but I don't believe it was the intention of the bill writer. Doesn't sound to me like it was the intention of the bill writer to encompass the turnkey nature of what I think you're describing, which is it's actually costing the people of Guam 1.8. It's actually not, because the $300 million from the ARP is not the people of Guam's money, it's federal monies. And any grants that come out of the federal pockets are also not the people of Guam's money, it's the federal monies. And so it's the borrowing is the 767, which is the 35 times 30. Whereas the difference, so if this hospital ends up costing more, 1.1, it's 1.1 minus 767. 767 covers what it covers, and then everything else is covered. That's our job, to look for the rest of the money.
Mr. Chair, I'm just looking at their figures where they said total to be financed is 767 million. So that's after having deducted the 300 million from the ARP. And I have a lot of questions that were not answered yet, Mr. Chair. And
Yes,
I also want to ask whether infrastructure at 50 million was correctly estimated, because the estimate that we got was 250 million.
Madam Speaker, I'm not doubting you have questions. All I asked, and I've answered earlier, I asked that we ask the questions. You have 5 minutes. The time has elapsed. I allowed the panel to answer it, and we'll just move to the next senator. And we've got one more round to come around. I just prefer that our colleagues here ask the questions, because the panel are here. That's what they want to hear, is the questions, so they can answer it. And then we can move from there. And I understand where you come from. I have no doubt you have questions, and everyone else also. All right? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone in the panel would like to comment to any of the questions or statements made by the speaker? If not, we'll move to Senator Parrish. Do you have any questions?
I can yield my time to the speaker for this round.
All right, you have used all your 5 minutes. Speaker Terlai, if you can please continue on, you've got 5 more minutes. Thank you.
Yes, well, some of my questions have already been put on the record, Mr. Chair, and just not answered. So, for example, we're only, the bill is only financing 35 million, yet their analysis shows that the total annual lease payment is 60 million. So, and then, you know, we talked about the bond. And so I guess I wanted to know too, is the infrastructure cost correct, 50 million? Because I thought we heard an estimate of 250 million if it's going to be placed at Manila.
It's premature to make the call on how much infrastructure is going to cost exactly, ma'am.
All right, I thought I heard an estimate of 250 million, and that yesterday we found out that the lease payments, that if the government is going to lease this property from the military, that those lease payments had not yet been incorporated in this analysis either. And, you know, of course, I'm questioning why they can't, if this property is excess to the military, why it can't be returned to the government of Guam and returned to the original landowners, and then if you need to lease it from the original landowners if they're willing, as opposed to, you know, we're going to enter into a lease with the federal government, and then we're going to do a lease back with the private developer to federal government land. I mean, I don't know, that seems to contradict our policy that we already have in Guam law regarding return of land to the original landowners. And I guess, Mr. Chair, if they could just explain item 1, why is the earned income tax credit available for fiscal year 2022 only?
You're asking the panel. Maybe DOA can comment to that.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Speaker. The EICC credit under the federal law is available for income tax returns for fiscal year 2021. So that will be paid out in the tax refunds for fiscal 2022, and the reimbursement will come in fiscal 2022 correspondingly.
Is it available after 2022? Isn't that what we decided, that it is going to be available every year?
Yes, it is going to be available every year, but the cash flows won't start until 2022.
Right. And when does the bill start? When would the bill, what does the bill authorize, in your opinion, as to, you know, finance the first 35 million coming out of the general fund?
Well, it makes available funding from the date that the bill becomes effective. I mean,
Okay.
That's what it says at the end.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, another question is, you know, so we didn't get the actual bond calculations, if it was a bond. But there's another thing I have on page 13. So we're talking about this medical information management system, the electronic medical record system, in particular, the electronic medical record system. At the public hearing, Mr. Kando discussed, I thought at great length, how they are implementing the EHR this October. That was their goal, and so that will be implemented. Are we going to fund that again, and additionally in this new hospital, or isn't that already a contract that you've entered into?
Well, it's an ongoing expense. We have secured the MedSphere CareView electronic health record system, and that's going on right now in terms of the training, in terms of the building, the landscape for the clinical practitioners, and so that's ongoing for this existing facility. For the new facility, it may not be the MedSphere, it may be another product, we don't know, but this is what we have right now. For the next 5-6 years, as long as we're at the facility. For the new facility, there might be another product that, may be better, may be more efficient. And so if it does happen, then that's certainly something we need to make sure we have in place for the new hospital that will then be interfaced with public health and behavioral health, so that information on the clients that we see, and if they go to public health or to behavioral health, all of that medical information of that particular patient will then be, communicated electronically in the new system, if it's going to be a new system. We're hoping not. We're hoping that we will continue. But, technology changes. Technology gets advanced, and so.
All right, thank you. Okay, yeah, because it says that GITA shall include in the specifications all those things, and so I was wondering why we were going to be doing that again. I don't want to be going through that with CMS again, that we are, behind with our EHR. Hope that's a
Okay,
continuous.
we're addressing that issue already.
Okay, so the what about GITA? The language about the contract versus being a construction contract being entered into even prior to design or financing being undertaken? And the studies that we are also waiting for.
Madam Speaker, what page are you?
Page 10, 83107.
So I don't, I believe the intention for the plan for the building of the medical campus is for the architecture and engineering to be done first. I don't read either way in this 83107. It says prior to undertaking the work of designing, building, financing, leasing. I don't necessarily, I think that one can still enter into an RFP for architecture and engineering, and as well as the infrastructure work, et cetera, prior to this. But I can't speak to this specific passage. We're not the ones that wrote this.
Your intention is to, of course, do the design and the financing, make the design before you enter into a contract with a contractor, right?
Our plan is to do what makes most sense.
Okay. All right. Yeah, my only concern, I want to get this project done. We have an opportunity to use funds that were never available to us before, but I'm just concerned that if, I don't want to finance it in the most expensive way possible. I would like to do it in the cheapest way possible. Is it possible that some of the bonds are expiring like by 2031, or other opportunity to increase our bond capacity so that we could do it cheaper?
I think, Madam Speaker, if you wait till 2031, there may be, we have a number of financial instruments from historical experience that can be refinanced at lower rates, should lower rates prevail at that time. But unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball and can't look at whether or not what the interest rate environment will be 10 years from now. The interest rate environment 10 years ago are rather, I want to say between 2005 and 2007, everyone thought it was a great deal to get a 6% mortgage rate. And right now we're at 3% mortgage rates for home mortgages. And so in the same regard, interest rate risk is very real when it comes to transactions of this size. And so while we can wait for the government of Guam to have the capacity to borrow more and secure lower financing, right now the rates are relatively low. And with Guam's current bond rating, you're getting a very similar interest rate. Could you save, if we went out for a AAA rated, if in an ideal world, if the hospital system was AAA rated, if the hospital system was an accredited AAA rated bond, then we could secure the cheapest financing out there, but that's not the case. The hospital is not an autonomous agency with its own track record of positive cash flow in that way. So this is generally the most affordable is the lease-leaseback today. That's not to preclude the lease-leaseback from being entered into with the ability to refinance should the interest rates drop.
Okay,
which
I
has
thought
been
you
happening in
just
the past.
said earlier that the bond would have been cheaper.
It would have, but it's again cheaper today if we're going after a bond today.
Yes,
Cheaper
so I'm asking you, what do we have? Mike, Guam's bond capacity, you had talked earlier about doing this in installments. We're only funding even half of what you actually need today if this bill is passed. And you talked about installments. The director of the hospital talked about 5 years are going to be in there. So I'm asking you, if it's cheaper to do it by bond, what in our bond capacity might change in the next 5 years? I use 2031 because that's the only date I know of, but I'm asking you, the experts, what are we looking at in our bond capacity? Does any of that change in the next 5 years? Because you've described that we've got $350 million.
Our next bond gets paid off in 2032.
Okay.
So it's pretty level.
So we're going to stay at $350 million available for definitely the next 5 to 10 years.
350 plus whatever principal is paid, yeah. 350 plus whatever principal is paid in the next 5 years or so.
Okay. All right, that's what I want to know. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Parrish, you waived your time. We will now proceed to Senator Amanda Shelton. Senator Shelton? Okay, Senator Brown, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. Some of those questions I know Speaker had put forth. There's other parts of the bill, though, I want to ask because it also puts together this committee. And are we able to do that at this time, or are we only focused on the financial aspects of this bill?
On this round, because Ms. Mendiola will only be, Gita won't be available this morning.
Okay,
So if
so
we
you
can
just want to
focus
focus
on
on the
them, and then we
financial.
can go after.
Because
we can ask the
I
others this
agree with the
afternoon.
speaker, the follow-up with regards to the mechanisms for the financing, because, certain things are undefined right now. One, and the most basic thing's been brought up is the issue of the property. And as you know, Mr. Chair, at the public hearing, that was actually a very prominent presentation that was made with regards to individuals that are representatives or heirs that are original landowners of the property that's being proposed. So we don't have that issue addressed. Certainly, it would be in conflict of a lot of the initiatives on Guam and has been legislatively to return lands to the original landowners. So that puts that issue up in the air for me with regards to the actual site location. Then with regards, what studies are studies being done? Because I'm getting the impression the government of Guam is undertaking these studies with regards, for example, to the infrastructure. The archaeological, who's doing it? Is it, the one archaeologist at Parks and Rec that's doing the archaeological assessments? I mean, how are these things coming to be to put this into perspective that, if it is the location up in Manilo that's being selected, how do we come to that determination when, one, the property is not at least in terms of our historic policy, would be something, what are we going to do if the land gets turned over by the military? Are we going to follow the law and, look at transferring that to the original landowners and then lease it back from them or purchase it from them? And then who's really doing the studies? I mean, because this is looked at as a government project, I don't want to short circuit the process, because we put everybody, we assume we're putting everybody else to the same standard. We've been very public for some here to chastise the military in the construction of the base up north at NCS. So, it's the same land. I mean, same island. So I want, in all fairness, to make sure that those standards are also met by the government of Guam. So I just want to get a clear idea of how we're proceeding, because we need to start with the land to build up, to even have something to address the financing on. So do we have any feedback or knowledge where we are with that, and who's really doing, unless they're hiring or contracting experts out in the field to do these kind of assessments? It can't just be oh, by the way, go out and check it, So can we get a clear picture of that, Ms. Mendiola, where we're at with that, or anyone else here in the panel can provide a response?
Certainly, thank you, Senator. There's, and those are all really keen observations, and I agree that we always must make room for the unexpected. And I think at the get-go, as the task force was approaching this project, this was a lot of the reason why, while Eagles Field, the Mingilaw site was the preferred site, is the preferred site, there remain 2 other sites on the table for this very reason. The current site, the site that we're focusing on here, the Land and Infrastructure Committee is working towards all of those items that you've cited. The first thing that they've been doing is surveying and assessing the land at a very preliminary basis. I believe there was the Guam GWA and GPA, if not have been contacted, will be contacted very, very soon concerning the infrastructure. We anticipate that the infrastructure will largely be informed by their experience building the CCU building in Manila. So we don't think we're starting from absolute zero at the Manila site. Nonetheless, it's something we're taking into consideration. And I do believe that the Land and Infrastructure Committee is also looking at all the other considerations, including the EPA, the archaeology, et cetera. It has not currently been issued via RFP for the work to be done by a private contractor to do any of the assessment, the official assessments to get permitted, et cetera. And I believe yesterday it may have been discussed, the process of the use of the land. Gita was there for the discussions, and the governor did originally ask for all of this land back so that it could go through the process. And it was never on the table. I say that this was, Eagles Field was not on the table insofar as the military, I believe, had cited something to the effect of needing that land for training and other exercises. It was very kind of nondescript and vague. And that the governor had proposed building a hospital. And of course, a hospital has mutual benefit for both our folks outside the fence and as well as the military. And at that point in time, I believe that's when the military came to the table and started talking about a license to use and a lease to use. Gita is not the decision maker there, and so the back and forth discussion about the terms of that, and then what we will be subject to. If the land still belongs to the military, and the military is willing to undertake some of the work involved, the environmentals, et cetera, then that is a cost that we would appreciate that they absorb. So as I believe, Senator, you've been experienced in other land return, or have been here to see other lands returned where they were returned to the people of Guam just dirty environmentally. And then there's also land that is environmentally remediated and then returned more recently, perhaps. And so at this point in time, it's not clear where this land falls with regard to that. In the event that the land of the people of the land that is currently held in CLTC inventory or GALC inventory, if it was another site identified, then most definitely I think the governor would be open to, she would follow the process as prescribed in the law.
Well, then I assume it would be dependent upon, are we simply going to build a hospital first and foremost and make that the priority at this point, which I don't argue about the need for a new facility. But then it's a question, are we putting everything else, and does it necessarily have to be in a campus collectively? Because if we were looking at simply siting a hospital, there's probably other properties that would accommodate the size and space and perhaps the infrastructure that can readily address that versus the concept that's being proposed here of having a huge campus, which is obviously going to require additional acreage and cost up front if we're going to go through this financing model. But I'm glad you're clarifying that. So at least right now, as far as we know, we don't have a defined piece of property that we're saying definitely this is where this hospital is going to be or this campus is going to be located.
Yes, Senator, we have a preferred property, but not
Right.
but not
Okay, I
defined
appreciate that.
property.
I appreciate being able to say we have a preferred location. I mean, looking at this lease to own sort of thing, I mean, we had that with the JFK project, and the speaker had inquired with regards to if we simply just went out and did bond financing and then, hired a contractor to come in versus, I mean, this is the Cadillac version. I like it, but it's also quite expensive as well. Has anything, God forbid me to ask this, but I'm a Republican, so I get to ask this. Has there any other alternative of financing being looked through a public-private partnership outside of this lease to own? I mean, I haven't heard any discussion, and I'm sure those of you in the committee have maybe discussed this. I mean, we have this GRMC that was built in recent years and is operating. How does that play? Has that been looked at? How does that play into, and I have no interest in GRMC, financial or otherwise. How has that even been looked at? I mean, with regards to the location, the siting, I mean, that hospital was built in northern Guam. I assume the focus may have been because, the larger part of the population is in northern Guam that can be accommodated as well with the use of that facility. But has anything even been contemplated with regards to that? Is there any other financing option mechanism that could be available that would be even more beneficial to the people of looking, aside from this simply, build and have them build it and we lease it, and it's an expensive package. JFK was an expensive package. JFK was an expensive package, and it didn't come without its problems with regards to construction. A lot of permitting violations that we had to intercede with regards to JFK, so even that in and of itself was not a perfect. We think that that's a better option. And it doesn't have any headaches. It had its share of headaches. So I'm just curious, have you looked at it, and is that available? Because, I mean, we know GITA more so for the bond financing aspect of it than these other types of financing.
Yes. Thank you, Senator, for that question, and thank you for enlightening everyone here into the myriad of possibilities we can look at. And I think this bill came relatively early on in the process. The task force commenced relatively recently in the last few months, but the team has been working very hard to look at different financing options. We also look at what's typical. So for public health, public-private financing, not typical. Usually with public health, it's a state-level type of financing. For hospitals, you find all kinds of iterations of public-private partnerships, as simple as a lease, because a lease-leaseback is essentially a public-private partnership.
Right.
And then you have some that are more owner-operated, and et cetera. And so we remain open to exploring those possibilities as they have been explored in the past as well. But because this campus encompasses several different agencies that have several different types of financing, we're trying to kind of stay fluid as far as wherever the grant financing is. Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness recently acquired a grant specific to building. If they can acquire another grant specific to building, that will always be, free money will always be our first choice.
Sure.
After free money, of course, the cheapest money is going to be our second choice. And so we do appreciate the authors of the bill for having the foresight to look at this during a historically low interest rate environment. But you are absolutely right. We are early on in the process, and we certainly do continue to explore what's out there with regard to the possibilities of financing and creative financing.
One other question, of course, Mr. Chairman, I know we will move on, and I can always ask these other questions on the next round, but I want to know whether or not it has been discussed of how are we going to proceed. I mean, it's important, obviously, the physical infrastructure and building it, But I think even more importantly is a discussion on who and how is the new hospital going to be operated. Is the intention to keep it under the government of Guam's leadership? Or are we looking at a private partnership in the actual operations and management of the hospital? You know, are we going to take it to the next level? Do we feel that the government of Guam is the most efficient process? Because my gosh, if we're going to start dissecting the issue of the hospital, we'll have other issues to look at as to whether or not it's the most cost efficient. We understand we're always going to have a certain population of indigent that we're going to have to address health care, but we don't want to be put in a situation where we continue to watch health care deteriorate because of the continued, you know, there's only so many people you can put on the ship in providing the health care service. And what we've seen in our lifetime, obviously, you know, diminishment of that as a result of not having enough funds, because you have the expectation that you're going to take anyone and everyone who needs care coming through the doors of GMH. So is that something envisioned to take it to a different level of sophistication and being able to bring a private partner perhaps in managing the hospital that can bring a lot more to the table than we currently have available? And should the government of Guam continue to be in the business of direct management? Because there's obviously, again, I mean, certainly Mrs. Posadas, you yourself are a healthcare professional of many years. You know, you bring that to the table. But there have been times we've obviously had management that does not have that experience. And we you know, we're in that back and forth versus do we simply, you know, increase the standard and expertise and outreach that perhaps a private partner can bring to the table, so that we're not just looking at the physical infrastructure and having, you know, nice buildings on the campus, but ensuring that the level and quality of care that's being provided is at a better level than certainly what we've seen. Is that being envisioned and discussed?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think I'd like, one of the items discussed with the heads of the various units of healthcare has been the model of the University of Guam and the Research Corporation of the University of Guam. So RCOG, which was passed by legislation, operates similar to like the Endowment Foundation, where it's a private foundation. And the purpose of the RCOG was to streamline research monies flowing through to the University of Guam because there's such a short shelf life.
Right. The turnaround
to
time's
go
very
through
limited.
the turnaround time of hiring, contracting, spending.
Right.
That made it more efficient. I think that has been a highly successful model under the leadership of Kathleen Moore-Lin and with the buy-in of the university community. And so something that's been explored that is currently being explored by the task force is looking at if an RCUOG type of model might work for similar themed services offered by the medical campus. So for example, it would really be a nightmare to have janitors at public health and a janitorial contract under public health and a janitorial contract under an autonomous agency and a janitorial contract under another line agency, all in the same building. And then God forbid one runs into issues and then you have half the bathrooms clean on one side and the other half dirty on the other side. And so these are things that the task force is definitely looking into and kind of looking at it through the lens of, is it best when there's a semi-government agency type of structure similar to RCOG, or is it best when it's a part of a lease-leaseback or a public-private partnership as you cited?
Because I think, you know, because you would think that determining how we're going to move forward that process may be even involved in how the building is constructed. You know, because who's going to get to determine how that building's best constructed? I mean, my own experiences with the Naval Hospital, I mean, of course, for many years, we remember the Naval Hospital. You could take a bowling ball and roll it down those long halls and wings that they had there. And then, of course, you know, the current facility, which you see, is more designed to be more functional for the needs that, back then they had those huge wards. I mean, I'm sure it was very beneficial as well during the Vietnam era, in addition to that, and the facility they had down at Aston Park to operate. But obviously in modern times with modern medicine, that old facility, as large as it was, and it was one of the larger inventories of naval hospitals in the world, it didn't meet those needs. So we can appreciate, you know, the need for modern medicine, but I'm sure whoever, if we're looking at alternatives, which I'm certainly open to, because I think we want to kick that up to the next level. There are a number of inefficiencies in government and how it's run, and unfortunately individuals that take advantage of it because they have the opportunity to, because who's going to question them? But having that layer of expertise in the management of the hospital and yet still being able to ensure health care, and perhaps the government may just simply have to address the funding for those indigent in our community cannot afford the health care. So we don't denigrate the process by not having the resources that's needed. And this is not this is not anything new. We maybe to a certain degree, obviously, we're suffering from that, dealing with our existing medical services that we can provide in our community. And I'm sure that if we're looking at that as an alternative and an option, that might have impact on how this building is to be it just looking at the hospital itself. How is the most ideal way to construct that hospital to meet operational needs? And I don't necessarily know that it's just our abilities of what we know here on Guam to do that, or the others that have the expertise that have built these facilities elsewhere to make sure that we have a modern facility that actually operates and is in the best need and interest of the healthcare professionals that we'd like to have work at the hospital. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you're looking at me. I'm looking back at you. And I'll move my questions to the next round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Tello, you've got 5 minutes, ma'am.
I think I get an extra from yesterday because you cut me off short, but I'll take it. Okay, Half-a-day. Good morning to the panel. Good morning, Melanie. Thank you for being here, and congratulations again. Wishing you the very best. Remember the time we met and talked about using funding for a feasibility study with regards to a new hospital, and I believe it was awarded from the CID. Are you going to be using that, and how much was it, and are you going to be using that money for this particular project?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. To clarify, this was something you asked at the end of, towards the tail end of the hearing yesterday, I recall. And Tina was not aware because it's another department that kind of works on this project, this aspect of the project. We utilize the SEDS, the Office of the Build-Up, Vera Tapasnia's office, utilized the SEDS to apply for a grant under the Office of Economic Adjustment, the OEA. That grant was awarded to us in the amount of $1.76 million. The $1.76 million is to be utilized to update the hospital study from 2012, 2016, address the collective need of the campus, so a number of different factors. That has already commenced, so we are utilizing the services we are undertaking the work under the study. I think what's outlined, what I read articulated in the bill, had to do with the reuse of the hospital, which is touched on in the in our task order for this current funded study, but it's a little different, and so more money dedicated towards more feasibility is appreciated. It can be directed kind of to meet whatever is not currently met by the money that is currently being utilized under the OEA study today. Does that make sense?
In other words, the money that we found, has been used for something else as we're building up toward what we're looking at, and that's the next phase of the, yes. I understand what you're using that for, okay. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that it's, the 1.6 is actually turning into a little bit more, and the ability to use that money for grant money, to obtain more money from it, so,
That's right.
They always say you need money to make money, so.
It would not have, quite frankly, Senator, it would not have been such a strong case to the OEA had it not been present in the SEDS that was submitted prior to our submission for that grant application. So certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for working with me on trying to get that money through. The other one is that, is there going to be any restrictions or anything on grants or funds from the federal government if we go the route of PPP, using a private-public partnership or the lease back?
Anything that is, I think that Tina will echo my sentiment in this, as she has much more experience than I do in all of this. If whatever is likely, when you're a lender, when you're lending money, the things that concern you are generally deeper than if you're giving away money. So if it were the other way around, if the question was, if we go after this grant, would any of our loans change or terms of the loans change? I don't believe that the short answer is no. I don't believe this would preclude us from any type of grant funding.
Okay.
What it would do for us is it would provide us with matching, leverage, towards grant funding. So it could be very, very helpful and a very powerful tool for grant funding by contrast.
Okay, thank you so much. If we are not able to use the ARP funding, what then?
Well, I think that my child will probably spend more time with her dad while Tina and I burn the midnight oil looking for more money.
Okay.
No,
But
it's,
does it-
in all seriousness, Senator, in the event the ARP money is not eligible for use for this facility, I think it's a combination of things. Number one, we will be more aggressive about looking out for funding on many different fronts, including grants, and potentially come back to you for additional borrowing. But more than that, I think the best thing is you build what you can afford. So this is when the buildings become maybe a little bit different. Maybe we don't get exactly what we want.
Would it cost more to incorporate a VA clinic into the campus?
That is currently the vision of Governor Leon Guerrero, is to include the VA in this campus in some capacity. In addition, it's worth mentioning that the Division for Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities, DISID, is also expected to participate potentially in this project. And because of its proximity to the University of Guam and GCC, it is expected that this will play a major role as far as workforce development. Earlier, Senator Torres had mentioned building our capacity for residency. It'll already build the capacity for nursing rotation. Currently, there's a limitation of the number of nurses that can rotate, and that limits the number of students that can graduate the nursing program at the University of Guam. This will certainly expand that and expand our workforce in that area.
But will it cost additional funding to incorporate, or have you already anticipated that to be incorporating them, or do you plan on asking the Department of the federal side to fund this part of the hospital?
We anticipate asking the federal side to fund or defray anything dealing with the VA.
Okay.
There's also significant funding for disability individuals with the DISA types of projects and programs, organizations.
Okay.
It can also, from the perspective of the budget, many of these agencies we're discussing currently rent, DISID rents, public health rents, so that will be some cost savings on your part, or on the part of the budget. And so I think it's going to be a combination, again, of federal funding as well as other types of funding.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought that up about the hospital, because during the task force, Lillian and I was, and you, of course, you were attending there, Melanie. Thank you so much for your guidance through that task force. It was excellent. I'm glad the flow was so smooth, and incorporating all the other subcommittees coming in. And one of them, of course, when I brought up the ability to make this hospital a teaching hospital, and you guys all agreed to that, and of course residency, but it doesn't stop there. It talks about being able to provide a residency hospital to allow even foreign doctors from the Philippines, from Japan, from Taiwan, to actually seek residency here at this hospital, meaning they'll be here for 2 years. Also, to incorporate a consortium that we can bring in. We're bringing nurses in. Well, we can also, I think Senator Rodriguez, in his report, the 283 report that he had put out, incorporated a consortium to bring doctors to Guam specialists, which brings me to the next question. In the proposal that you brought for the infrastructure, you also talked about the IT, but what about the equipment, like a PET scan, a diagnostic equipment used for specialists who do come to Guam on a rotating basis to see our patients? The inability for them to perform certain procedures is because we don't have the equipment here on island. Is that equipment also incorporated in this potential $735 million for the hospital?
The current study that we're, or the current work that we're undertaking to assess the state of the hospital today, to update the 2013, the 2016 studies, the Army Corps of Engineers, and assess the current needs of the medical community includes the assessment of capital equipment and things along those lines.
Okay,
So it's not
that's good.
yet determined if all the money here will be able to cover everything. It's a little early to tell, but the intent is, yes, that we will have a number that encompasses everything.
Okay, and you're Okay. So
Not the best of everything,
Well,
just
you know,
everything.
from what I hear, what I hear is from speaking with other engineers and architects, they've said that the Army Corps of Engineer has a tendency of inflating the amount, making it higher than it really is, you know. So I'm hoping that if that's the case, and that the funding that they told us how much, 700+ million, is actually going to help cover that equipment that's desperately needed at the hospital in order for these specialists to be, who come here on a regular basis, to assist. The other one I have is,
If I may, Senator Teller,
Sure.
yes, that estimate that the Army Corps put on the table for replacing the hospital, those were all factored in terms of medical equipment. We have an internal task force in the hospital, and we're listing all of those services in addition to all those big ticket item equipment such as MRI, such as the PET scan, CT scan, all of that we're factoring into this hospital that we're envisioning. We will provide the services. And so, you know, yes, that's factored into that cost. The other thing I want to add is that in addition to then, you know, the resources, right, and bringing in the residents and all that, we have an opportunity here when we have that medical campus for research. That we can get some funding that will cover all three healthcare facilities, you know, engaging in research, especially with this COVID, that has really opened up a lot of, you know, opportunities and the minds of people. We need to have more science. We need to have more data. So, you know, that again, looking forward to having that medical campus with the three agencies, including the veterans and the DISIT, that can open up opportunities for research for Guam.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'd like to commend you for the use of your telemedicine during the COVID crisis, and being able to contact doctors from off-island, you know, to assist Guam Memorial. So it's that ability of telemedicine. The other one is it common practice for when going out for a bond or lease back to come back to the legislature? This is to Gita. Like I said, is it common practice when going out for a bond or lease back to come back to the legislature to allow the body to review or approve moving forward?
Sorry.
Hi, Tina.
So we haven't come back to the legislature because it brings uncertainty at the buy side when we're out in the market to say, thank you for the offers, but can you wait and, you know, there's a possibility that there could be a change, and that just puts us in a bad negotiating position. But I can report that in all the times that we've gone out, we've actually done better. We've always, whenever we come to the legislature, we're very conservative in what we present. So coming back, going to the bond market, we've always beat our projections that we've given to the senators, so to the legislature. So the only time we weren't able to sell, like Mel said, was in back in 2008 when the market was falling. But for the most part, the bonds are in high demand, and we're able to negotiate rates better than when what we present.
Thank you, Tina, for that. Mel, has there been any, has the administration received any companies who are interested in doing this project so far?
I'm trying to kind of juggle my mind as far as, I don't believe we have, not in my time at GITA. I don't know if anyone has approached the front office, but no one has approached GITA as far as I can recall.
And then lastly for Gita, Celeste is from, what is the company that?
Matrix.
Matrix. Are they still involved? Is Gita still paying Matrix to be a part of this campus buildup?
Yes, so the role of Matrix is a contractor to, so the Office of the Governor has an MOU with GITA. And it is to undertake an update of the 2012, 2016, et cetera, study, as well as work with the different agencies. The focus of this project is medical services. And so what will be consolidated, what will remain separate, the Matrix Group has remained on contract since the previous administration. That has not expired. And so they are the ones undertaking the work. They were the ones that did the 2012 study, so it seemed logical that they update the study. But I do want to differentiate for the body that unlike the Hagåtña master plan, they are not expected to produce a master plan. They're expected to give us an update of the 2012 study, and in addition, encompass the collective requests. If you read the 2012 study, they still refer to Guam Behavioral as mental health under receivership. That's different now. Public health still stood. That's different now. GRMC did not exist. And so all of those different, all of those changes to the climate of our healthcare industry are affecting this new study. And so that is what they're in the middle, that's kind of what they're in the middle of doing right now.
Okay, thank you for that question. And Mr. Byrne, EITC reimbursement that you talked about, are you confident that we'll be receiving this reimbursement every year?
Yes, Senator, it's enshrined in federal law, so I'm confident.
Very confident. That's good to know. That's good to know. And okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mel, for being here. And please, I mentioned if you were listening yesterday about public law from U.S. Public Law 111383 regarding the military buildup and the consolidation of the impact from this military to provide to DOI additional funding on this impact, and it has yet to be addressed or brought to the Fed's side. So this is opportunity for a lot more money to come our way to address the issues on this impact of the military buildup. Please look into that one. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Blas, do you have any questions, sir, or comments? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the panel for being here today. Morning, Prima.
Happy day, Primo.
That way, when I start to yell at you, we know it's family matters, hombre. First off, again, thank you for this chart here, or this report here, and listening intently to a lot of the conversation, and most especially the back and forth and the questions that was provided asked by the speaker. The bill as proposed is for a healthcare center, and in the discussion here, we're finding that this Center of Excellence healthcare facility is going to be, a facility for not just GMH, but for public health and for behavioral health. And now we're hearing also that it may be inclusive of other agencies, dissident and whatnot. And the bill here purports to have for an authorization of $35 million for this healthcare facility, but then I think there was a priority and emphasis, because I was reading through it, on the hospital. Yet in the discussions we're having, one of the things that we find is that I think it is the strategy, or it's the direction of putting together this healthcare center of excellence to prioritize public health. Is that what I'm hearing?
Senator, I believe that each of the healthcare agencies hold equally high priority.
Okay.
But what was planned by the task force is that public health will be phase 1, whereas phase 2 would be GMH, not because it's less important, but because GMH is a more involved project, that the pre-construction phase would probably take longer than public health's facility.
Okay. So recognizing that in the construct of this bill, and recognizing now, and I understand the author of this legislation, and you guys as well admit, that this discussion of this bill wasn't part of your preliminary discussions. Does the construct of this bill in prioritizing, or just specifically stating for GMH, will that throw a wrench, or does that have to be, does the language have to be amended to take into consideration that your priority of what you want to do is phase one is public health.
We don't think so. Tina and I don't, Gita doesn't really think so, that it needs to be amended to reflect priority projects. What happens is when you go out for any type of public finance type of instrument, they ask you to list qualified projects. If one project occurs before the other, that's generally okay. An example is the hotel occupancy, the HOT bond, hotel occupancy tax bond. You had the museum go up, you had the farmers co-op go up, and other projects. The fishermen's co-op has not gone up yet. It was neither here nor there to the bondholders which went up first, just that the projects that went up were consistent with what was requested. That you did what you said you're going to do with the bond money. So that would be articulated further in the bond, or the contract with the lease back, the lease back, or whatever financial instrument that we'd be utilizing for whichever phase that we're in.
Okay. Are there many questions that I have that are not specific or germane to this, and I'll try to stay away from it. Don't worry, Mr. Chair, and I'll keep within my 5 minutes. Don't stare at me like that. Okay. One of the things I was reading intently is this Guam healthcare financing what we know. And I'm going to acknowledge that although the report is primarily and still draft, if you will, right? Okay, so I'm going on that assumption. However, in this assumption, what really gets to me is the bottom line here: total annual lease payment of $60,982,845. How do we intend to pay that? Now I'm talking about yours, not the authors, okay, not the bill, but on this thing. How did you intend, or what was the discussion on getting that $60 million annually? That's to you, Prima. I didn't say Primo.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to answer because I created this worksheet, and as part of the task force, we wanted to lay the groundwork of this is what our estimates are, and if government wanted to finance it directly, this is what it would cost. And so again, the numbers there were placeholders for what it could cost. We knew how much GMH was. We knew the specialties needed for public health and Guam behavioral. So again, this was just if we did a lease back, similar to the structure we're doing today, this is what it'll cost. And the realization that we cannot afford to do this. So that's why the financing task force was brought together to identify other ways to fund this. And so towards the end of the report, we are looking at working on other financing sources, grants, veterans affairs, education. So again, this was just if we had to do it today, the hospital's gonna fall down tomorrow. I mean, there's an issue with the hospital, this is what we would have to do, but again, we are taking that time to find ways to finance it. So again, this was just where we are today, if we had to do it today. But again, we're taking this time to do what we can. And again, if we have a lease back holder, lease company, you pay your debt, your rental, and then the additional rental covers insurance and maintenance. And then a CIP reserve is established to ensure that every 5 years you're getting air cons changed, buildings painted. So these are just, again, estimates of, conservative estimates of worst-case scenarios.
I think also, Prabhu, what is not taken into account here are, there's current, again, some of the agencies expected to be housed here, including public health, currently pay rent. And so that is an annually budgeted type of situation. You also have the grants that we would like to aggressively go after. You also have the reuse, any reuse plans you could potentially have at existing sites. So GMH in Tamuning, Public Health, the site that burned down, or the site that's currently not being used in Manila, all of those have potential reuse value, and those values are being assessed in the feasibility and these studies that are currently ongoing. So it is a little early to say other sources and to calculate where other sources of funding could come, from where other sources of funding could come. The bread and butter of this bill appears to be the EITC, and we're in agreement that that's a pretty solid, that's a solid source of financing. But as far as any additional, anything above 35 million, that is where we'd have to identify whether it's from an annual appropriation of what you'd currently pay towards leases, et cetera, what makes best sense from the perspective of the budget that you pass annually.
And I ask this because my reservation for the bill in itself is based on is predicated on a number of unknown factors, okay? Those unknown factors, you know, are in the millions of dollars, literally, okay? And even if we were to consider, you know, this as is, and let's say this is it, this is the final figure and everything, you know, 60 million, close to $61 million annually, okay? In an economic atmosphere that we're at today, and that's where I'll save those questions for in the third round, is to talk more about, okay, this versus what's the economic realities, okay? But then also, I recognize that this is probably put together because this is the ideal preferred Eagles Field facility, am I right? I mean, that's the only place where we can put all three campuses, I mean, all three agencies, now possibly 5, into one campus.
This is primarily based on the Army Corps of Engineers estimate of how much it would cost to replace GMH.
Understood.
Right.
But
not specific to any one site.
But of the 3 sites that you have, what other 2 sites do you have that will be sufficient to accommodate the campus that you want to build with this structure?
I believe just size-wise, there is a site north of Eagles Field in Atacao, Manilao, that can also accommodate the size that we are looking for.
Okay, so you do have another site.
We, again, Senator, the governor has, we have the preferred site,
Sure,
which is
sure,
the
sure,
current
sure.
site, and then we have backups in case something
Because yesterday we
happens.
talked about the other site was at Oka Point, right? And we already knew that that wasn't going to be. That
Oka
wasn't
Point
feasible.
will likely not be able to accommodate the medical campus in its current vision
So
of the
Plan
task
A,
force.
okay,
Right.
so can we call this Plan A? That you want to build a center of excellence? Because you see, the thing is, I hope that also in this discussion, because we do need the facilities, that we recognize that we may not have we may not have the resources nor the money to be able to put all 3 of them in one site, or 5 of them, for that matter, on one site. Okay? And you know, I mean, again, you're still exploring the alternatives, the options, and everything, and I hope that isn't, you know, is clearly not off the table, because okay, Mr. Chair, I know 5 minutes is up. I'll save my economic questions for the third round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Terlai, do you have any questions?
I thank you for the panel, and I'm very proud of our budget person here, Mr. San Agustin and Stephen, because every time we sit down and we kind of just talk about funding, they're always confident that we can meet and satisfy whatever we owe in the millions of dollars that the federal government has given us. I just wanted to point out that, you know, the total cost for the public health financing is at least over $1 billion, right? Okay, as far as the report goes, less the contribution of the $300 million, which is coming from the American Rescue Plan. So we're talking about $760-some million, 300 million that we have to really think about. And I guess I just wanted to ask, are we confident enough that we can get that $767 million, 300 from the grants that should be coming from the federal government? Are we that confident? Because our budget person and Mr. Leon Guerrero is very confident, and I follow these two guys. So I want to hear it from the professionals also. Are we going to get that? Do you think we're going to get the $767 million federal grant? And maybe some of that also can be taken out from the general fund as we go year to year. But I just wanted to know if we're going to get that through federal grant, because that's a lot of money. And I'm just afraid that some of the things that we're going to build and the constructions that's happening right now, we just had a meeting with the Department of Correction regarding the complete total reconstruction of the Department of Correction, and those involves the money involved there. The majority of the money involved is all federal grant. So we're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and I just wanted to be sure that we can get that money through grants, because I'm afraid that if we don't get that money, maybe the federal receivership can come in and take everything back that we have built. And that's what I'm afraid of.
Senator, thank you for that question. I think, so the total bill that we're looking at is, as estimated, a very round estimate, is around $1.1 billion, with $300 million from the ARP, which is a grant. You're right. The remainder is what's being proposed in this bill, not as a grant, but to borrow. So the question is, assuming that you're talking about the same thing, to borrow the $700 million, we're confident that the market will respond positively to Guam to be able to borrow this amount of money. Having said that, if there comes a major hang-up as far as financing is concerned, ARP is not allowed, or other major sources of financing fall through, then certainly this transaction, we can come back to the table and revisit this with the body as to what is affordable at a later point in time.
So is it safe for me to say that you mentioned borrow, the $767 million, 300 is going to be borrowed to pay that thing, pay that amount? And also, I would think that maybe some grant money would come in to support that.
Yes, sir. What is proposed in the bill is to borrow. And yes, your expectation that there would be some grant money to come in to support this, that is a very a good charge for the team here to go out and aggressively look for grants to support this. But can it be known with certainty whether or not we're going to find $767 million worth of grants to support this project? No, it cannot, not at this point in time.
Okay. And because I was even looking at the $60 million that we will be getting from the EITC, but $35 million has been committed for that already. So we still have some left over, and maybe we can use some of that to accommodate whatever we owe. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. My colleagues, we are now on the last final round. I would ask first, because the Gita folks will not be back this afternoon. Does anyone have questions? And that'll be the first priority, the senators that have questions for Gita. You need to ask it now, because once we break for recess, they won't be back. And unless behavioral will be back this afternoon, GMH will be back this afternoon, Public Health may not be back this afternoon because he's just sent me a text. He's got a lot of meetings that were scheduled this afternoon that deals in grants and stuff like that he's working with. Hopefully it's the grant for this bill. But we'll start with you, Senator Moore. Do you have questions for Gita? We want to focus on Gita first before we break for recess, okay? So you have a question for Gita?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation here, and I'm looking at what we know. If you can, first page, regarding public health and social services, the new CDC level 2 and 3 lab, 32 million must be encumbered by September 2021. I'm supposing this is, it helps prioritize level 1 first, or project 1 first. Please expand on that bullet point.
Director? The CDC the CDC lab is expected to be the first project, and the Environmental Health Office to break ground at the new medical campus next year.
Otherwise, we lose the money. Right?
Actually, Mel, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think
I'm working on this grant also in line with the Office of the Governor. So this actually is money that is being provided by the Department of Defense. I'm working with Gary Kuwabara and other members, including Vera, and what is going to happen is they're going to give a grant award directly to the Office of the Governor, and there are 2 set recipients already built into this process. And so the intent is that these funds will be obligated, but they believe they have about a 5-year period in which they would have to be expended. So we want to secure the funds this year so that we don't lose them, and then we'll have about 5 years to actually do the construction. So it is being awarded directly to the Office of the Governor.
Okay, thank you. Going along with that same slide, we're talking next about Guam Memorial Hospital and the existing facility in great despair. So of course, in the 35th, we tried to really pump in a lot of money in during the budget time to do some great despair work, try to keep the facility the best we can. With prioritizing Department of Public Health and Social Services as number 1, specifically for the CDC level 2 and 3 that Art discussed, will we be looking at the legislature side and the budget side with that delay? And I'm not sure how long that delay will be getting to the new hospital, how much more money we would need to prioritize, because the report is saying you're in great despair. How do we keep the current facility from sinking or falling off the cliff?
When the Army Corps did their assessment on all the major situation or all the major infrastructure and the facility, the leaking roof, the envelope, the windows, those were tagged at $21 million for us to repair them as soon as possible. And we've been doing those on an ongoing basis. Right now, the roof repair, we sent out the RFP, and there is a contractor who will then, we're negotiating to get that roof repaired and the envelope. So it's an ongoing process, and although it was tagged by the Army Corps at $21 million, when we did our own assessment and estimating the cost, it was at $35 million. So we're gradually dealing with those. We've got some funds already that we're using, and so we're gradually getting those repaired to buy us the 5-7 years that we need to continue the hospital in operation while we're going to get to the new hospital when it gets constructed. So it's going to take about 5-7 years for that new hospital to get constructed. Does that answer your question, Senator?
So as number 2 in priority list, you're looking at the maximum of 7 years being at your current location before you have a ribbon cutting at wherever this new hospital is going to be built at, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. There was mention about the public-private partnership of the management of especially at the new facility. In the 35th, we introduced something to discuss that. I'm wondering, in the current administration and your discussion with Adelup, is there a consideration for the private-public partnership of the, especially with the new facility? Is that in discussion?
That has been discussed. It's not anything new, and so we continue to discuss how best we can approach that. If that is our priority right now, is to have a public-private partnership, that will mean we have to do an RFP. But the priority we're giving right now is really the facilities itself in terms of the roof, the envelope, the EHR. We have the revenue cycle management team here on premise to help us with our billing and coding and revenue cycle management processes to capture, some of the services, some of the charges that we haven't been able to capture for whatever reason. And so we're now really fine-tuning our billing and our coding processes. We've got more billers, we've got more coders that are certified. So we're only an uptake here. We're making some progress to really increase and enhance our revenue processes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Duenas, none. Senator Torres, do you have any questions? Preferably Gita.
Yeah, just a brief question. For Gita, do you see a conflict or a discrepancy between the total available for future debt obligation under the debt ceiling calculation versus the amount that is anticipated to be financed?
Yes, and that's primarily why the leaseback is the selected route, or the route that we're kind of spending the most time on discussing today, because the debt ceiling would be if we were going after a bond, like a general obligation. The leaseback is not subject to the debt ceiling of 353.
Okay, good to know. I overlooked that
This
point.
remains, this keeps your 353 plus whatever, as Tina had mentioned, the next bond that's paid off is in 2031 or so. So this keeps this available for other capital projects or other projects that the government of Guam and the body may agree to construct in the future.
Yes, actually, that's right. It's in your bond financing slide. Okay, I just, as I was scrolling through it, I overlooked that. But thank you very much for pointing that out.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on that question I've been meaning to ask. So the bill is only proposing to finance half the $60 million annual lease payment. Isn't that right? We're going to pay $35 million a year. That's, well, approximately half. So 35 of the $60 million that's required according to your calculations for annual lease payments. So I wanted to know what is the total of that so I can subtract that from the $767,300,000 that needs to be financed. So we found a portion of that. What would that be if we authorize the $35 million today?
So this is an estimate based on 30 years at 5% of $60 million that has the base payment of $48 million and an insurance and maintenance reserve of $12 million. So a total of $60 million. There's multiple ways to bring that $60 million payment down, a little closer to your 35 authorized. The ways to bring it down are currently the prevailing interest rates are estimated to be lower. This is a very conservative estimate at 5%. If we were to estimate at 4.5 or 4%, that would bring the $60 million down closer to the $40 million level. You could also bring down the 767 down, reduce it by any amount. So for example, public health, 100 million is inclusive of the 32 million grant. It's also inclusive of the $2 million Department of Environmental Health, or the Environmental Health Office. So the 767, we can potentially reduce that by another 30 million. So these numbers at the moment are not set in stone. If the amount appropriated is 35 million, depending on market factors, we could qualify for, depending on market factors, 35 million could put us in, we could afford the 767 with maybe less in combination with other grants and other financing other grants, I suppose, is where I'd go with that. But this is just at this juncture is an estimate. Also, I was talking to Tina about this. The 35 million could be inclusive of the insurance and maintenance, whereas in this situation, this is the 767 is exclusive of the insurance and maintenance. So what would happen is if you included the insurance and maintenance, that would bring down the amount you could borrow. Instead of 767, it would bring it down.
Bring it down or up? Well, I mean, tell me, repeat that then. So this 767, that total to be financed, doesn't include the 12 million a year maintenance? So we're only financing the, I don't understand. Please.
So per this calculation, again, this is based on 30 years at 5%.
Just the maintenance part.
30 years at 5%, that's rental payment of 48,786,000 and deposit of 25% annual rent, so 60 million, a total monthly payment of 60 million. So the other approach we can take in this calculation is we can say we only have 50 million, or we only have 40 million, or 35 million. And we want to include maintenance and insurance in that payment. That will then change the total amount to be financed. The line above it, it'll bring it down. So less will be authorized. Or you can bring down the amounts authorized. Across the board, you can say public health will reduce 100 million by 32 million because those are grants that have been secured. Or we want to reduce it by another 30 or 40 million under Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness because that's not until phase 3, so we can cross that bridge when we get to it. Ultimately, if you get comfortable with an amount you're comfortable authorizing, inclusive of insurance and maintenance, then from there, you can look at what is affordable from the perspective of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's a starting point. Again, this is a starting point. This bill was introduced not by any of us here, but this bill was introduced prior to really digging down and getting deep into the numbers. So to be able to speak specific to this is 30 years at 5%. We could be, by the time we secure financing, it could be 4%, could be 4.5%. There could be a portion of this that's USDA financed, which could go out 40 years instead of 30 years. There's there's portions that could be covered by grants. So none of that is taken into account with these calculations. So,
yeah, I guess that's again, if we already can readjust these calculations based on what you know about the grants that are going to be going to public health and the hospital or behavioral health, then I don't understand why they're not adjusted. We are trying to pass a bill here that I want to ensure that we're basing it on numbers that have been provided before us, and that we're not just giving a blank check to do anything. I mean, that we're tying it to what we believe the intention really is. And so if you're telling me the intention is not to finance maintenance right now with this bill, that's not the way I read the bill. The bill talks about maintenance in various parts of it, says that it's going to be included. So anyway, so this, I don't know. I guess if you have other scenarios, maybe you should present those to us as well. That if these estimates are too high, for example, for public health, then give us a new estimate. In fact, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask. If we built the lab's financed, if we built the entire public health facility, would we be able to do that with less than $35 million?
That's, at this juncture, as I had mentioned, Speaker, this is, the task force did not write this legislation. The task force is in the middle of planning. And so we can't speak to how much the public health or behavioral or even GMH, there's anecdotal discussion that the Army Corps is too conservative, and that was even said today. So is the Army Corps actually going to be 700 million, or if it's going to be 500 million? If this is something the body decides they want to wait on, we're still working on it,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I
we're okay with,
appreciate that. But yeah, so my concern was that at the public hearing, they discussed, could we just take care of public health today, right? And with the money that we have, or the money that we have coming, the 35 million, if we're able to do that, and they're taken care of, even maybe without financing, we would be able to take care of them. I don't know, but, so.
Speaker, if I might just respond to this presentation part. This is really a working document for the task force. So it's not, as Mel said, it's not set in stone, but just something that, we can reference, and it was prepared for the task force that met last week or the week before, and it's a working document. It's not set in stone.
And it's generally our practice to estimate on the higher side because it's 5%. For me to come here and tell you, Speaker, it's going to be 35 million. That'll cover $1 billion as long as we have an interest rate of 2.5% or 3%. That would not be prudent on our part to sell that bill of goods to you, and that's not what we do. So 5% is a conservative estimate. 30 years, there are instruments that go out longer. There are grants that we are relatively confident that we can obtain over the course of building the 3 phases. We believe that this bill was a great starting point for us. It certainly gives us an advantage. If the timing's not right, that's certainly up to you as our elected leaders.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just, I guess stuck because we're trying to use a $35 million financing to come to this annual lease payment of $60 million. But you're telling me now these numbers we should I'm going to disregard that then for now. I got a couple more questions. One is, this estimated $12 million a year for maintenance, can I just ask, how reasonable is that?
25% of annual rents is, I believe, a conservative estimate based on what is currently being paid with the other lease-back arrangements that the government of Guam is currently entered into.
Could you share those examples for example?
Sure. I don't have the numbers on reference. I can certainly send them to your office, but you would be looking at the lease-back Teason High School.
And we're paying 25% of annual rents.
You're probably
for
paying somewhere in the
maintenance?
neighborhood of 15 to 20%.
Okay,
And
15 to 20.
you're probably paying less, actually, I'm sorry, Speaker. With schools, you'd certainly pay less than a hospital. A hospital's a 24-hour
Yeah, that's why I'm asking where we got
business.
the 25% of annual rents. Where did we get that? Why do we determine that that is reasonable? It seems high. It might be that hospitals are higher than schools, but I just want to know, where do you get that 25% of annual?
Yes,
That's
that was
a lot of money, 12 million a year just for the maintenance. And then I wanted to ask, so the bill talks about maintenance, and then the bill talks about capital maintenance. So if you could just clarify, what is the difference between maintenance and capital maintenance? I mean, are we envisioning both with this, 12 million?
Right, so maintenance is not just cleaning the bathrooms. Maintenance, when it comes to a lease-back, involves the repainting, the air conditioning, things along those lines. I believe the reason we looked at 25% was we did look at our baseline of what our schools currently spend. And we said schools are not 24-hour-a-day kind of structures. Schools do not operate at the capacity, per se, of hospitals, and not necessarily with the bandwidth. You have medical equipment that consumes a lot of power, and you also have oxygen, you have ventilation requirements, of course now with COVID, additional maintenance requirements as well. And so we felt that 25% at this juncture was prudent until we get a little bit more information about really what a maintenance plan would look like. Yeah.
Okay, I can understand funding, financing capital maintenance, but funding, cleaning up the bathrooms, I guess I'm questioning that, whether that has to be financed over 30 years. But if you look at page 9. trying to read this over and over. So on the bottom of page 9, it says, "The committee shall also specifically consider the contractor's ability and performance with regards to financing, development, and construction of healthcare facilities on Guam or in any similarly isolated locality." And I'm wondering which contractors would fit this description of financing, developing, and construction of healthcare facilities on Guam. Is this the person who built GRMC, or is there any other healthcare facility that's been built on Guam that might qualify them under this provision?
We were not, we did not write this bill, and so I'm not sure what the intent of the author was in sharing this, other than previous experience is good.
Okay. Well, I appreciate if Gita's able to bring these estimates down, that we are able to see that, and of course I want to ensure that when we, dedicate all of the earned income tax credit towards this, the reimbursement towards this project, that we are actually going to get it done. So that's why I'm trying to match that 60 million that you need in annual lease payments with this 35 that we're projecting here. And if these estimates can be redone, yeah, I would appreciate that if we can really, you're going to be the one writing the RFP, Gita is, and it says they're going to write the RFP, by the way, by 30 days in receipt of the program study. And I'm just wondering if that's also reasonable, or is it reasonable, as you've discussed, to phase out public health? You can write an RFP, you already know the specs public health might need, I would think, are more easily ascertainable than everything we're going to need for a hospital and to get that all done. I don't know, but this really envisions one giant RFP for the entire design of the entire, and all of the facilities. And so if we're, so we'd have to wait for all of that planning kind of to be done before you can do your RFP. And I'd like to see if we can take care of public health, or the smaller projects first, and let's do that in piecemeal, and hopefully, still take advantage of the savings. I mean, the percentage rates that are available today, and yet complete certain projects. So, I didn't know until today that when you said you're starting with public health, that we're only starting with that lab because it's federally funded. But I'm hoping we can start with the entire public health building. I'm thinking that's one of the cheaper parts of this, right, or less expensive, because they're known. It's very known. What they need, what they might not need. I would think it's easily.
I think that's a great observation, Madam Speaker. I do think that's why the task force looked at a phased approach for that very reason, because so that the financing can be more fluid and take care of things that can be done more easily and quicker first, and so I think that's a very realistic feedback, and that's very realistic feedback and good for us.
And I just want to add to that, yes, it's good. That's why we decided to make it into a phase process, because it's not going to be one giant RFP. The hospital alone is very complex. That's going to take one RFP, and that's going to take a while to really develop the specifications for those RFP, because it's a very complex.
Well, that makes sense, but I think the bill's written kind of anticipates, one. So, and that we dedicate this, entire 35 million towards it all. But I'm hoping we can do that a little bit differently, as you suggested. Is there any restriction that you know of on this land that you prefer, that as to building specs, for example? Is there any restriction as to height or anything like that?
Our preliminary assessment is that there may be, and this is subject to verification, there may be a height restriction of 2 floors.
Okay, I kind of heard that.
2 or 3 floors.
Okay.
There is some discussion about going down like underground, but my assessment of that as a resident of Manilao is that we're known for our very heavy-duty limestone rock. And unless there's a plan to quarry that and sell it, then going down might not be feasible. But I'm not the subject matter expert. But that is something that we are certainly looking at. We have not received anything definitive as far as restrictions on height or any other type of variance.
All right. It's also over the aquifer, so I hope that's not the plan, but okay.
Your time is
Over?
up.
All right,
Madam
thank you.
Speaker.
Thank you, Gita, thank you.
Senator Parrish, do you have any question or you want to yield to the speaker?
No, I do have questions. Thank you, Mr.
All
Chair.
right,
And
there you
good
go.
morning, Director Mendiola. So glad for you to be here today and all the panel. Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple questions. So I noticed that this bill is somewhat, the template was based on the JFK bill. And in part of in the section where it says use of tax-exempt bonds, in the JFK bill, it limited to an interest rate of no more than 8.5%. And then in this bill, it basically says GITA would determine the rates that are to be reasonable and competitive. So I guess my concern is, should we put a cap at this point in the bill?
Certainly within your purview, ma'am. And we can provide some feedback as to what a good enough cushion to get us out there, but enough cushion to have it in writing to hold everyone accountable.
Okay, thank you.
Open to that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I do appreciate you looking at having bond counsel look at the bill, just in case we do go for bonds and we want to make sure it passes muster.
Generally, we will use bond counsel regardless of whether it's a leaseback, or bond, because it's still a publicly traded instrument. So we call them bond counsel, but bond also looks at loan, also looks at leaseback, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. And then in reference to the JFK project, there was protests. And so considering that this bill the template is used, so judging from that experience, what can we do differently to maybe prevent or reduce that occurrence?
Sure. I was not here for I'm not as knowledgeable about JFK, the construction of JFK, and all the stages of grief that they must have gone through at the time with the protest. But I do believe one of the number one reasons for protest, and I believe this is what happened with JFK, was the A&E may not have been done yet. So in this situation, the governor wanted the A&E to be done first prior to, so that people are bidding on apples versus apples, not this contractor's vision of a school versus that contractor's vision of a school. But Senator, I can double check what the purpose of the reason for the protest is. But I believe that just kind of is what I think may have happened. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps maybe a multi-step bid. So we're talking about, like you said, design, an RFP for design, and then maybe an IFB for construction. Is that still, do you think this bill covers that?
Senator, I don't believe that the RFP for design or A&E is covered in this bill, and I believe that's because the expectation is that the A&E will be covered by the ARP monies. So that would be a separate RFP covered by a separate instrument, I think is the rationale of the I think that was the rationale of the authors of the bill.
Okay. And then also with the utilities, they utilize a performance management office to deal with long-term capital projects. And just wondering, what is your understanding of that, and how is it worthwhile to do that with this particular project?
I think for a project of this scope, a PMO would be a very prudent thing to have, like a third-party watchdog for on behalf of the client.
Okay, thank you.
Which is GovBom.
So including language such as an RFP?
Yes, exactly. I'm not sure, Senator, I'm not familiar enough with the building process to know where that would be inserted, if it's here in the bill or if that would be in the specs of the RFP. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Or a separate RFP altogether funded. Right. I would need DPW's guidance on how to engage. I think DPW would best speak to, is it something that must be articulated in the law or not?
Okay. And also, I think GPA, GWA, they have a lot of experience with that. So maybe perhaps putting language in the bill to, maybe consult with them to see what worked, what didn't work, maybe how to best to structure such a thing. Would that be helpful?
I think that's certainly a best practice that we would, that GPA and GWA are involved anyway, because we're talking about infrastructure a significant amount of infrastructure needed for this area of the island, or any area. And so I think I don't think it needs to be articulated. They're already involved in the Land and Infrastructure Committee, but they are involved from the perspective of installing utilities at the campus, not necessarily their experience with a PMO. But there are multiple agencies, I think, that have utilized a PMO, and that'd be fine with us. It would be in our benefit to consult all. DPW is involved in the task force as well, and so again, I believe we would rely on DPW's call on how best to engage a PMO and at what stage.
I think this would be prudent because it's a multi-year project, and this is going to outlive, many of us here, I think. So to have somebody oversee the performance, the targets are being met, the financing is still on board. So yeah, I think that I agree with you that's an important element. The other thing is, so we know how much we're possibly paying out to a developer. How much of GRT are we expecting to get? So perhaps we can, recycle some of that funding back into has that been thought of as far as part of paying back the construction?
I do believe this bill speaks only to EITC, and I don't have, I would defer to my colleagues in the fiscal team to answer that question about BPT forecasts. But, yeah.
So maybe that's a question for Director Byrne. Maybe, I don't know if this has been thought of, but perhaps maybe we can set aside some of that GRT money to go back into paying, the financing.
Yes, Senator, that's certainly a possibility, and this project would certainly result in increased BPT receipts. So that's certainly something that could be considered.
Are they going to avail themselves of any tax credits? Is this something that would be a tax credit project? Can we, how much can we refine the amount of GRT that's going to be produced from this? It could be anybody on the panel.
Well, as for the tax credits, I have to turn that back to Guido, but I don't think anybody can really estimate the amount of BPT receipts until we have a clearer understanding of the total cost of the project and how much is hard construction and how much is services.
Yeah. Do you think that'd be worthwhile to put up front for financing? Is that something?
You mean pledge the BPT receipts in advance?
Yeah, so whatever the GRT is going to be paid, can we just put that back into the financing of it? Is that something that's prudent? I'm not too sure. It's something, just a thought.
It's certainly something to be considered. Of course, you'd have to possibly reconsider that each year as you went through the budget bill, because the budget bill generally contemplates the entire amount of the BPT receipts that you expect to receive. But you could certainly reserve if that, a portion of that of the total receipts. But you'd also have to note that as the Guido administration said, this is a phased project, so BPT receipts might vary from year to year depending upon which phase they're in.
Okay, thank you for that response. Another question, so in regards to the bill, maybe let me ask a question about the land. So Director Mendiola, you were mentioning that there is perhaps talks about licensing or lease to use. And how would that affect the financing or the development of the project if it's the Minilao project, Minilao land that's chosen?
At the preliminary look, thank you, Senator. At the preliminary look, it does not affect the financing, whether it's a license or a lease. And that's primarily because the hospital is a lifeline type of project that has, that is a greater reliability of repayment from a government source versus a public pool or other types of public facilities. Does that make sense?
In regards to the bill itself, there are certain parts of it that, so in certain sections of the bill, it talks about permitting. And in section 83115, it says that notwithstanding any other provision of law, Imagahag and Guahan shall have the authority to take any and all steps necessary to expedite the issuance of any and all permits for the development, design, construction of the new facility. Is this necessary to put in here? I mean, I understand that, the governor has the power to expedite, but does it have to be in law?
I don't think that's a Gita question. I would probably run it by the legal counsel of the legislature if it's germane to the execution of this law.
Okay. And then there is another part, Section 3, repealing clause. All laws or parts of any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of this bill are hereby repealed and amended accordingly. So again, that's perhaps another question. I don't know if this panel has this expertise to do that, but is there any thought that this bill would actually go against laws? And what I think that's such a blanket clause that might provide some problems.
Senator Paris, as you make statements on the bill, can you tell us the page and the lines so that we can follow you?
Sure, it's the
Because the bill
last
was,
page.
okay, because the bill was scrubbed to legal, so if there's any question, we can always refer it back to legal for a review.
Yeah, it's the last page, Section 3, repealing clause. So it says, all laws or parts of any law that is inconsistent with the provisions contained in the 21st Century Healthcare Center Excellence Construction Act of 2021 are hereby repealed or amended accordingly. So I just wanted to know, is there any thought that this bill might actually go against any current laws?
We can probably refer that to legal.
Legal, okay.
Like all bills, they're all referred to legal, and they give us a legal feedback on if there's any contradiction.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the implications of that might be if we're repealing all laws at this point. So that might go against this bill.
Okay, you're just about out of time.
Just if I could have one more question about JFK.
You got one question. You got less than 10 seconds, ma'am. Please state your question.
So actually, first, I really truly believe we must build what we can afford, and if there's a way we can reduce the cost by re-envisioning our healthcare system. And I know the Army Corps of Engineers maybe created this plan or this kind of roadmap, but I think it's really important for us to rethink our healthcare system and what kind of structure we're going to build. So I'm all for that, and I'm all for rebuilding the hospital. It's something we've desperately needed. But, again, my concern are the costs and, whether we can afford it and how can we ensure that, we have a financing scheme that's durable. The thing with the JFK construction, so again, maybe perhaps this could be offline, but, my calculations are that we spent $168 million on the building of the school. And my understanding that was anticipated. And looking at this bill is based on that law. A lot of elements are similar to that bill. And again, maybe it's more of a recommendation is to rethink what is the best way forward to help reduce the cost. Yeah. So.
I think that when it comes to buildings, it is difficult to compare the renovation of JFK and rebuild to a brand new build. I think every building will have its nuanced differences. And whether $168 million is a lot is potentially a matter of perspective. We're currently working on Simon Sanchez, and it's high also. And so I do think that it is the intent and the goal of the working group to be as industrious as possible to identify the most efficient use of space across the three. And I think that was part of the rationale for centralizing the agencies, is things like shared conference space, shared training rooms, shared pharmacy. When you shrink square footage, generally you save on construction costs. And so that is an objective of the working group.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd ask my remaining colleagues, do you have any questions for Gita? As we go along, Madam Vice, do you have? And the only reason why is because once we break for recess, they won't be back. So you got to ask your questions now and forever hold your peace. Madam Vice Speaker, do you have?
Mr. Chair, I had about 3 or 4 questions, but I'm going to forego all that because I have amendments later on, so
All right.
I yield back to you, sir.
Okay, Senator Brown, do you have any questions for Gita?
Not so much on the financing side, but the role of Gita with regards to the, on page 9 on section 83105, identification projects and procurement. You know, with regards to the consultation of healthcare agencies, you know, how you're supposed to use this study and the projects to be included. You know, but it goes on to talk about how the fact that this committee ultimately will be the one to address the procurement and selection of whoever the company or contractor is going to be to build this. So what role is Gita with regards to that? And we're totally taking this out of what is the normal part of the procurement process, with the creation of this committee that will evaluate and determine who's going to be selected. And then we have language here that the selection of the contractor shall be based upon the proposal that delivers the best value for Guam in meeting the objectives of all healthcare agencies. I mean, it's a nice sentence, but what does that really mean? And then it starts off saying, under the supervision of the legislature in Guam. The legislature in Guam really has no role in supervising any of this to begin with. I mean, that's not our role. We're the policy-making branch. We pass laws, but we're not the direct supervisors of any government or Guam agency. So, I mean, can you clarify what the role of Gita is with regards to this committee and then the selection of the committee? I mean, you know, I'm going to go back to the basics. I mean, what expertise does this committee have in selecting and procurement? Did they take the modules? I mean, you know, we've gone through such elaborate steps to want to ensure that we're right-sizing procurement in the government of Guam, and now we're putting this committee together to come up with all these ideas, and we're putting this committee together to make the decision on who's going to be selecting the contractor. Gosh, if I'm a contractor, I'm going to want to be friends of this committee. You know, I mean, gee. You know, I mean, we're doing a lot of exceptions to the current laws right now. That, you know, I'm wondering why is that the case and why is there a need for that? So what role is Gita in all of this as part of this committee now that now becomes in and of itself a once, you know, deciding all these things, including who gets selected? And, you know, I have no clue what this means, you know, based on the best value of Guam in meeting the objectives of all healthcare agencies. I mean, we're never going to meet the objectives of everybody all at once. So I don't know what that means at all. I know it's not your language, you know, you didn't put this language together, but.
Yeah, Gita's pretty neutral about this language. We are happy to, under the hot bond, we did issue the procurement for the construction of under hot bond. I believe that was because at the time, and Senator, you were here, you were in the administration at the time.
Yeah, but not involved with hot bond procurement.
Right, I do believe it had something to do with DPW focusing on other projects and hot bond specifically, Gita being designated. It was not public finance, in fact, it was a different area. It was the real property division. Based on the amount of work outlaid with that, Gita is relatively neutral about whether or not to hold this role or not. I leave that to the author of the legislation.
One thing I really want to say, Mr. Chairman, before Gita does leave, because, you know, this is a big undertaking, and you know, like I said, I don't know anyone's going to argue we don't need a new hospital. I think we put the hospital at the top of the list, and certainly we don't want to forget public health because their main administrative operations are homeless as a result of the fire that occurred at their facility. But it's like we're making these big decisions with undefined, you know, we don't ultimately know what it is that's going to be built to even know what the price tag's going to be. And it's a question of how much are we opening up here with, you know, notwithstanding provisions of laws of authority that we're giving rather than going stage by stage, because it still sounds like they're in the formulation process. And I don't want to open the floodgates without really knowing what are we giving, because we don't really know at this point what we're getting, because the committees don't even know that. We don't know what the cost is going to be, and do we know if this $35 million a year is going to be adequate or not, and can we ultimately afford it? Are we going to start downscaling from what the plans are? It's just interesting at this juncture as to whether or not, to the degree that what we're authorizing in this bill is what we should be doing at this juncture, when I don't have a clear picture of where we're at. I don't have a clear picture of the location of where it's going to be, a hospital, or is it just the hospital? Does it require this whole multi-complex of the Center of Excellence to be constructed? What's the ultimate cost? We're not even being given options available. If we just build the hospital and we build it at this location, this is what it's going to cost. If we build it with public health attached to it, this is what it's going to cost. If we include mental health, this is what it's going to cost. Or if we build it at separate locations and not have a single campus, this is what it's going to cost. Normally, we're dealing with more specifics, and I don't sense that at this point. At least with what the information that has been provided so far, no fault to the parties here. They can only move along as they're able to get the information available. So I just want to state that for the record, because I don't know how we venture on projects this big, of this magnitude. As I mentioned yesterday, single largest probably, construction project that we're looking at in our government, without answers to these questions. That really opens a big door of, a huge question mark for me. I mean, I understand the vision. Visions are wonderful. We can all come up with them, and we all want to wrap ourselves around them and think that we're, it's us. We're just so visionary. But I think moving in general like this, with opening up, they're going to select who the contractor is. Further on, I won't elaborate too much on it because it doesn't affect GITA, but my gosh, we're even asking the governor to, notwithstanding any other provisions of law, essentially facilitate this process through permitting. What does that mean? I think we just need to be mindful. I think we have the same desired objectives, but at the end of the day, it's also going to be the question of the bottom line of what is the cost, and we don't have specific costs. Normally, if we're going out on the bond market or wherever, we have a general idea of what the amount is that we're going to pursue and what we're going to deliver with regards to those borrowing points. So I just think that is a concern. I think we need to be mindful of that moving forward. I mean, we are in our own personal finances. I mean, if I'm going to build a house, I'm going to want to know the general idea of what that house is going to cost when I enter into a contract. I'm also want to know that I'm able to pay for it. And right now, it's a big question mark. I think I appreciate the information that's been provided, but I just don't think we have all those, at least a substantial amount of answers to give some comfort in making decisions at this point. I see the vision, I understand it, but when it gets down to the dollars and cents and our capabilities, and as I mentioned yesterday, I still don't know where we're going to be in a few months. I don't know where we're going to be in the next year economically in this community. I don't know what other demands that are more pressing that are going to knock on our door. So I just want to relay that, but thank you very much, Ms. Mendiola, for coming in and providing the information. I know this is not you can't answer all of these things because they're not within your purview or on your shoulders, so to speak. But I appreciate your candor in relaying your responses to us and the other members of the legislature. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Teller, do you have any questions for Gita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Gita, it was assumed that $35 million from the Earned Income Tax Credit was going to be established. I was excited for that because we found some kind of fund money. Then it makes me even more excited to know that Mr. Burns has total confidence that this is going to happen every year. So we know that $35 million is going to be something to pay off, this loan, or to pay off the private-public partnership or lease back, at least. I don't like to say loan, at all, because we already know that we're capped already. We only have $353 million, if I'm not mistaken, in our debt capacity left over. That's 353 in our debt capacity. And we've seen, emergencies come forward and happen on this island that we're going to have to do something to repair something, or actually the federal government will mandate us to do something, to pay something off, or we're responsible for rebuilding some kind of infrastructure. So it's kind of scary to see in this bill just a carte blanche open, Governor, you can go out and get a loan, because in the Section 4 after the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is number 1, which I have no problem with. Second, that $35 million from the general fund shall be appropriated annually. I don't know why we can't put, if there's so much confidence in this money coming to Guam, why can't we put $35 million, every year after that? But it doesn't. It just says one time we use 35 million from the earned income tax. Why can't we do that every year? And then as far as this loan is concerned, or grant, in section 4 where it says loans, oh, let me read the whole thing. The use of other financing options is authorized for the purpose of this act, including but not limited to loans. We are giving the governor authority to go out and get a loan. It's a little bit different from using funding that it's already, identified, the 35 million coming from earned income tax credit. And then it says grants, which is fine. Grants, we try and get those all the time. And then it says bond financing and other alternative funding or financing options. This is carte blanche. This is a blank check. We're giving the governor authority to do whatever she wants to go out and get this funding. And I've been a great advocate. It was my bill that I put together for the task force on building a new hospital. So I've been a great advocate on moving forward on building it. But there are concerns. So Millie, do you find any issue with it changing Section 2 and eliminating Section 2 and after tax credit shall be available for fiscal year 22 and just make it 35 million coming from the earned income tax credit do you have any issues when going out to get other means of financing through the federal government, through grants, other than going out and getting loans and bond financing? Do you think there's a way to make this happen without incorporating loans and bond financing? Do you think we can still do this and build this hospital?
I think that number 1 and 2, whether or not you combine the two or have them stand alone or strike one, is more of a maybe we can get bond counsel to weigh in on that, or legal counsel to weigh in on that. As far as is other financing necessary to be authorized, for GITA, we like flexibility to look at things like USDA and bond financing. Having said that, if it's not permitted in the law, then that's fine too.
Okay, so what would this do to our, let me get the right number on that, on our debt ceiling. 300, yeah, I was right, it was about 353,102,730. Okay.
I don't think it's an all or nothing approach here. I think because we're building in phases, it could very well be different instruments for different phases. So public health might very well be something that can be financed under USDA. And I don't necessarily, Guam Behavioral, if their calculation is 100 million, but it comes down even more, that could be under the debt ceiling as a general obligation. So it's, like I said, it gives us flexibility. It's not offensive to GITA if it's stricken. It just kind of tells us what we need to do.
And I think that in the event that you're not able to get the money you need right away, or you have all the mechanisms, and well, first, you've got to go through the whole process. The physical study, the structural, the usage, all that needs to come into play, right?
Most definitely.
You get a better picture. So in the event, if we just maintain that 35 million coming from earned income tax credit every year, instead of just 1 year, 2022, and have that every year, and eliminate loans.
Senator Taylor, when you talk about the earned income credit, it's being funded, reimbursed federally.
Right.
After that, it's just done. So you can't keep repeating EITC. It just has to be identified that you're going to give 35, exactly what you said. It'll be appropriate every year, 35 million. That's why that follows the second part.
Well, I asked Director Burns, do you think that we are going to be reimbursed every year for the earned income tax credit, and feel confident that we are? So this is money that's going to be reimbursed to us. So it's money that we don't have to spend anymore, okay? So we're setting that aside. I mean, some people feel that this money should be set aside for tax returns. But if we obligate and stay with that 35 million every year for this, regardless if you call it earned income tax credit, I think that it's, yeah, that's why you're using general fund instead of earned income tax. I get that. But if we take away the loans and bond financing from this bill and allow GITA to do their magic, and Mel, I've seen you, pull not just one rabbit out of a hat, you've pulled several rabbits out of a hat, And if we could just put this aside and then move in this direction, and then later on coming back to the legislature when it comes time for borrowing, because it's this body that has to be responsible for the money of Guam, the taxpayers' money, right. The people of Guam's money. It's our responsibility, not GITA's, not the hospital, not public health. It's this body that's responsible for finances. So I think it's very prudent of us to be very cautious, move forward. We all need this hospital. We all know we need this hospital. Move forward and do your magic. And then in the event, worst case scenario, you have to come back to this body to ask for, approval for loans, to go out for loan or bond financing. No, the bond financing would not jeopardize the debt ceiling, will it? It will?
That's, again, Senator, I believe the purpose of this was because it's a phased approach. Mm-hmm. If there were certain portions that could be financed through loans or bonds, I think that was the purpose of the inclusion of this here. You're 100% correct. We can certainly go out and look for the best deal out there and do as much magic as we can. At the end of the day, and it is your responsibility to decide. I don't know if boxing us, I don't know if the exclusion of other options such as loans or bond financing helps or hurts your case, because the objective is to seek the either the lowest interest rate or the lowest payment over the longest amount of time. And so generally when you have those options in front of you, you can make those decisions, whereas if your only option is lease back with under these circumstances, or lease back with under these circumstances, it's just one option. So that doesn't give you as many options. Again, GITA is the administrators of we go out and we issue the public debt, or we go out and facilitate the issuance of public debt on the island's behalf. So making that strategic decision is certainly in your hands, more so than ours.
Well, Melanie, we all know it's about $1.6 billion to build this facility, minus the $300 million, taking it into about 800-something million to build this facility. Our debt ceiling is at $353 million. That is so much lower than what we need on this, and we need to be responsible, when it comes to the finances of this government, and this body has to. But I really have confidence in you that that this phased approach, we can start off with the 35 million every year to provide it, and then seek any additional loans or financing later, because right now just giving a blank check basically deters you from really trying, because why should you? We just forget trying to look for any kind of, which I know you won't do, but if we took it out of the equation, we know you're going to try a lot harder to find the money. So anyway,
I don't know if this is something you would consider, but you could certainly look at putting a cap on loans or bonds. So transactions of up to 50 million, you may consider options such as leases or loans or bonds. Only because USDA, their sweet spot, or HUD, I believe, their sweet spot is right around the $20 million mark. Right. And so we really wouldn't go after HUD for a $750 million medical campus, but we might go after them for a lab or a third, a phase 3 type of building. So whether or not you want to authorize that here, that's completely, that's up to you, but just some food for thought.
Yeah, there's that magic working. But the last thing is that, Melanie, is it true that through bond counsel, they do not recommend to reach your cap of your debt ceiling, that it does not fare well with all your investors on your other bonds, that reaching the cap of your ceiling is not a good thing.
I think I've not ever read anything in an official capacity to that effect.
Okay.
Having said that, it's generally good practice to leave some cushion. You never know what types of emergencies or other pressing structures. There are far fewer things more important than our health. Having said that, making sure our lights are on, our water is going, our trash is being picked up, our kids are going to school. Those are all things that rest on your hands rest on your shoulders to make decisions about with regard to our debt capacity. One thing that I do want to point out is that our debt ceiling has also not been evaluated, is probably coming up next year for another eval. Mm-hmm. And so if the cost of homes, we've all heard I believe you've all heard in the body through other legislation, right, that the cost of homes is going up. One can
assume our buildings will do the same.
That the debt ceiling may increase. I don't believe the debt ceiling will increase to the 750 million capacity. Right. Having said that, the financial situation of the debt ceiling may allow for more cushion in the future.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blas, do you have any questions? And you'll be followed by Senator Tello, and then we will recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. I'm just as hungry as you. Okay? And I appreciate the discussion about debt capacity and whether or not we have this ability, and recognizing that there are many different ways that we can fund this. But now the question is really the ability to pay. And maybe this is a question that I want to pose to not only to you, Ms. Mignola, but also to Steve Guerrero and to Edward Byrne, in each of your professional opinions, in light of what we're seeing right now. I mean, granted, if we were having the discussion pre-pandemic or whether a pandemic would never happen, this would have been a different discussion, okay? But the reality is that, we're facing some fiscal challenges, some financial challenges, and it's going to be coming over the next few months. I hate to see what that cliff is going to be like. And recognizing also that based on experts and based on opinions from a lot of people that we're not going to see pre-pandemic levels until probably another 2 or 3 years at best from now. Recognizing that, whether it be this kind of financing or any kind of financing, any financing that we're talking about is, do we have the ability, are we confident that at the end of the day, whatever that figure is that we're going to have to pay back, that we're going to have that ability to do that without taxing and burdening our community. One thing about government, it's not like private sector, okay? Private sector and the private business, if you can't afford it, you just don't put it out. You don't market it. We don't have the ability to force people to come into the stores to be able to buy a product so we can keep our store afloat. Government, on the other hand, has that ability. When we don't have enough money to be able to operate, we just raise taxes. We just raise fees. Now, recognizing that in the next few months, what we're going to do is we're going to come into a perfect storm. We're probably going to need to be able to do this. I appreciate, Mel, that you bring up that because the rising cost of homes, it may change in the valuation, but you don't foresee that. Hopefully, I don't foresee that either. Because you know what? At the end of the day, the person who's gotten now this home that was valued at $250,000 last year and now valued at $375,000 this year really doesn't have the capacity to pay that extra income tax based on that assessment. So the question is that I have for the three of you in your personal opinions, based on what we're, not just this, now based on what we see in the very near future and over the next year or so, is it prudent for us to have this conversation right now? Can we pay this without raising a single cent to our community? No? Let's start with Mr. Byrne.
Oh, thank you, Senator. That's a very big question. When you buy a house and you have a 30-year mortgage, you have to decide whether you think you can repay that loan over the life of that mortgage. And I think we're faced with a very similar situation here. Guam has never been able to contemplate such a scheme as this because it's never had the funding to undertake such a project as this, with the exception, as Mel said, with GPA and GWA, who have their own revenue streams. This central government doesn't have its own revenue stream except for the taxes that you mentioned. You're faced with a choice. Do we just go along as we are with a crumbling hospital, or do we try and do our very best to construct a facility that's going to last the life of the loan? It's going to last 30 years or more than 30 years in order to service people of the island for that period. This bill sets aside a sum of money. You can look at it as partly or fully, and I'll come to that in a minute, for funding this particular project, which I think everybody has agreed needs to be done. There doesn't seem to be too many ways of avoiding this project without dire consequences certainly within 10 years. The way to minimize the amount of funding that's required, and this has been going back and forth several times, is to look for and secure different sources of financing, in particular grants or loans that may be even cheaper than the leaseback proposition. That will reduce the overall cost of the project. I'm sure we'll all do whatever we can to get these grants from whichever source we can do. And I'll certainly do my very best to lend to that support. So, in answer to your question, you probably have to scale the project to match the financing. We haven't really got either side of the equation sorted out. We haven't got the funding side sorted out or the scale of the project sorted out. But that needs to be done over the next few months. And as Melanie has said, that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Steve?
Yes, Senator, I echo everything Mr. Burns has said, and I will add on is that anytime you tackle something of this magnitude, and like Senator Brown said, it's probably the biggest one the Governor of Guam is ever going to have to deal with or has dealt with since in the past. I'm thinking that, I'm looking at more of opportunity. We're always going to have challenges every fiscal year. Who knew about the pandemic? Who knew how it was going to affect the economy? Who knows we were right there? But even today, we managed to reduce the deficit. We got the best bond rating in the longest time. All these things are coming into fruition, and everybody's asking why. How is this possible, considering our current situation? I'm thinking more in the sense that we have the opportunity. We're still going to have our challenges. I'm of the opinion that Guam will run. We'll have its challenges by the end of the year. Federal assistance has been keeping this government afloat, but when all the assistance stops, is what we need to start planning for. PUA ends in September. That constitutes a big amount of our withholding tax. It also plays a big part in our BBT. But when all that happens, how much is that in dollars? How much is that going to cost the government? How much is it going to affect the government? We don't know. Again, on the flip side, we have all this reimbursement coming in from three major sources. That's a fairly large amount. But what I would like to look at is before we even start considering how to use that money, is to use this money to cover all the shortfalls or the potential shortfalls that we know is going to happen. And then at the end of the day, if there is any balance, I believe this is probably one of the best projects this government can tackle, considering we've been trying to build a hospital for the last 30 years. And like Mr. Burns says, we've never had the opportunity to do so, simply because of the funding. So with that, you asked the question, is it a great thing? I think nobody will dispute that building a hospital is important. But I think what's more important is this the time to do it? And I, like I said earlier, I mean, opportunity, I think this is a great opportunity to do so. Who knows what's going to happen next year? Like you said, next pandemic could be next year, 2 years. We don't know. But we got to take the opportunity that's in front of us now and run with it and maximize it. And I would like to think that this government can afford to do this going forward. Senator Tello mentioned about securing in law, setting aside $35 million, every year from the general fund. We basically do it for every bond. The only difference is that we just have to appropriate it every year. And that's normally the first thing we do when we talk about government revenues. We secure the bond first. Everything else comes second. So this will be no different. If we are going to do this, we are going to secure the money before we move on. And if it affects government operations and services, then we're going to have to do our best.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero.
Primo.
Primo,
Yes.
well, you're coming from a place of low blood sugar at this, no, I'm just joking. When it comes to discussion of the economy, this is really something I take very seriously. And I think if past performance is any indicator of future performance, we may want to kind of look at the past and ask ourselves why we didn't pull the trigger then. In 2012, there was a study, a hospital study, that said the same thing, that you need a new hospital, and the body did not pull the trigger then for various reasons. In 2016, I believe Senator Rodriguez commissioned another study. The body did not pull the trigger then for various reasons. And I've not been in politics long enough to know what those reasons were. I know that right now, COVID is a good enough reason not to pull the trigger again. But what I think is important to understand is we've needed a hospital since prior to the very first study I've kind of come across was in the Camacho administration when I just got out of college. And if we've been needing a new hospital for the last 15 or 20 years and we're just now deciding whether or not to pull the trigger, we probably needed to pull the trigger 5 years ago, regardless of what our economy was going through. Pre-pandemic, we were experiencing record tourism numbers. We were experiencing greater liquidity in our government finances. Interest rates were historically low. Bond rates were historically low. Puerto Rico is still a mess, so there is high demand for Guam financial products. That means that if there's high demand for Guam, the interest rate is low, so going out and borrowing for capital projects is cheap. That was not the case. PROMESA was not in play in 2012 or 2016. I think we have to look at the building of the hospital outside of the vacuum that is the COVID pandemic that I believe our leadership and our governor is navigating us out of very elegantly, with, of course, hiccups along the way, though, and that's the reality of things. When it comes to macroeconomics in the United States, they're experiencing job growth, they're experiencing low interest rates, more development as far as in private investment.
Can I interrupt you there, Phil? And I appreciate, they are experiencing low job growth and low interest rates. But we have to also recognize the fact that, the economic drivers, the economic stimulus, programs that are available there, 7,000 miles away, albeit, are not the same and similar to here. And so a lot of times,
I agree with that.
Okay, so-
I agree with that, Primo, but I don't think we're any less smart than they are out there.
No, we're not any less
And I don't
smart,
think we
but
want
we're
any less
also
for our
more
people
challenged.
than they do out there.
I think we're also more challenged.
We are challenged.
Okay.
Guam is a very unique place to do business. I think that's a very astute observation. Guam is a unique place to do business. If when you make a decision on this, whether it's today or 6 months from now or 12 months from now, Gita will be here to support you in going out and getting the financing. But deciding whether today is the day to pull the trigger, I would say, look at the economy over the next 30 years. Look at the things that you've put into place as leaders to protect us from things that cause problems or take advantage or inefficiency. I've heard many of the leaders here propose legislation over the last several years that I've been involved in government to improve efficiency and to improve government operations and to prevent abuse. And if all those things are working, then the future looks bright. But if things just continue to get worse and worse over the next 30 years, then this is probably not the right time to pull the trigger again. Overall, economy-wise, our tourism market is challenged. Having said that, the governor has put up an economic working group to diversify our economy. That is a long-range plan. It's not a this year or next year. It's a 5-year, 10-year, 15, 20, 30-year thing, along with the life cycle of this hospital or longer. And so the answer from Gita is that our future looks bright. But I think that that's because, again, I think that this needs to be viewed outside of the vacuum of just the last 18 months of interruption.
And I appreciate that. And, like I said, in the last 18 months just weren't the last 18 months, and I can understand this conversation. Okay? But the last 18 months put thousands of people in dire straits. Malik, okay, Ms. Posadas, appreciate that you're just sitting there. Just know that this conversation here is not because I'm in opposition of building a new hospital. I know that. We recognize that. But is this the time now? Do we need to pull the trigger tomorrow, today, okay? Do we have time to be able to listen more to this conversation? Because, the last question, promise, I think. What is the timeline that you have for this plan?
So my boss Lillian here is, she kind of dictates the timeline. She and the other healthcare agencies dictate the timeline to me. What we are looking at is groundbreaking of phase 1 beginning of fiscal next year, so October 2022. Phase 1 being the different components of public health, whether that's inclusive of the CDC lab, DEH, and their headquarter facility, something we're working through right now. I believe that public health is currently engaged with GURA as far as drawing up kind of a conceptual to get an idea of how it may look, in conjunction, kind of concurrent with working with the consultants to determine what types of services can be offered in phase 1, can be shared, et cetera. And very importantly, the movement of any kind of infrastructure issues that we may be facing.
So if your timeline for groundbreaking is October of next year, what's your deadline for preparing the roadmap?
Sorry?
The deadline for the roadmap.
The
plan.
The roadmap.
For this whole plan that you're trying to put together.
For the plan itself, the deadline for our plan as far as the medical service we want to offer, et cetera.
No, the deadline is okay. This thing is going to be put on that property, and it's going to cost this much. What's the deadline for that?
We're looking at trying to complete all this by the end of the calendar.
When?
We're trying to look at completing this by the end of the calendar year.
This calendar year.
That's correct.
Okay. So that's meaning the economic thing. I think at the end of the day, as we want to be able to build the hospital, guys, I bet you this conversation would be a whole lot different if we didn't have $300 million fall from the sky. Okay? I just want to remind everybody of that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Terlai, you are no questions. My colleagues, we have completed all 3 rounds. The panel will be excused. We will now recess for lunch. We will see you all back at 2:30. And at 2:30, we will not need the panel anymore. Thank you all for being here. We'll be discussing only amendments. My colleagues, please go during lunch and load up your amendments. Thank you. We will now recess until 2:30.